Chapter 1032. What are you talking about? Roddy stood in front of Basta and pointed at Kardashian's wrist. I just saw. You wanted to use violence to threaten Elder Kardashian? Basta raised his eyebrows because he suddenly found that this human who was always humble in front of him seemed to be a completely different person today. This contrast made his already bad mood even worse. Basta stiffened his neck. What? Does the Prime Minister still care about the internal affairs of the dragons? As the two of them were talking, the other dragons had unconsciously stood not far behind them. The movement just now could not be hidden. Iskar and Aglay all looked over, but the attitudes of the two sides were obviously different. The latter had a mocking expression because they believed that the Prime Minister could not do anything to the dragons. Basta thought so too. This time, it was his turn to cross his arms. Speak, what's the matter? Roddy did not look at the group of people behind him. He looked at Basta's gloomy face and said calmly, I don't care about the affairs of the dragons. You can say what you want to say, but Her Excellency Kardashian is a researcher in the Strategic Arms Research Department. So, what does this nuisance research department have to do with me? At this time, Basta was eager to find someone to vent his anger, and the submissive Roddy was naturally the perfect target. Even if Roddy had a lot of titles and deeds, he did not think that the human in front of him could pose a threat to him. Relying on coincidence and external forces to kill a few demons, did he really think that he could be on equal footing with the dragons? Roddy was not surprised by his look, because the thing about class also existed between humans and dragons. How could the dragon race's idea that they were naturally superior to others be something that could be changed overnight? He was very good at acting. In order to achieve his goals, Roddy had played all kinds of roles. However, from a border soldier to the Prime Minister of the country, he no longer needed these tricks. Standing in front of Basta, Roddy lowered his eyes and said in a low voice, The research department originally had nothing to do with you, but since you said those words and did those things, then it does matter. So? Basta found it funny. Prime Minister, do you need me to compensate you with anything? Magic crystal? Coins? Give me a number, I should be able to afford it. When he said this, Aglay and the others behind him roared with laughter. Luv added, I think this magic tower is quite shabby. If you need materials to repair it, I'm willing to pay. Will you die if you don't King say a few words? Rubens finally could not hold it in and scolded him on the spot. Luv's smile froze on his face. The black dragon Hurlo's temper was common. He pushed away Dean and Nick, who tried to stop him, and took 2 steps forward. Rubens, do you want to fight? Roddy did not care about the 2 black dragon Hurlo. He continued to look at Basta in front of him. I think, if you offend Researcher Kardashian, no matter if you are a dragon, a human, or anyone else, as the head of this department, I have the right to ask you to apologize to her right here and now. Basta burst out laughing. Prime Minister, this is our dragon's own business. How do you know that I offended her? Do you think I'm dead? Kardashian's voice came from the side. What did you do just now? You're not going to admit it now? Basta choked. He realized that Roddy obviously did not intend to be kind. So, he narrowed his eyes and said in a low voice, Today, I'll give you face. This matter will not be discussed for the time being. Sorry, the Kingdom of Karen does not need you to give face. Roddy said word by word. I'll say it again. Are you going to apologize? Both of them raised their voices. This caused the 2 black dragon Hurlo, who were originally glaring at each other, to turn their heads. In the eyes of the dragons, the Prime Minister had always been courteous. He always had a smile on his face when he attended various occasions. However, this time, his aura was completely different. The dragons could clearly feel the needle-like invasive feeling. Basta did not have the patience to talk about this. He was also furious. He reached out his hand and poked the leather armor in front of Roddy's chest. Then I'll tell you clearly, there's no way. Take a good look at yourself before you learn how to talk tough. Previously, because Basta's attitude towards Roddy was not good, Kardashian used this action to poke him. Now, Basta finally felt the pleasure of revenge. However, even after he poked him a few times, Roddy did not even shake. A ripple flashed on the surface of the leather armor. Roddy slowly raised his head. The Dragon Slayer mark in his eyes flashed. He took a step forward. Okay, then I'll think about it. Before Basta could understand what he meant, he saw Roddy suddenly raise his leg and kick. He was not weak, but at this moment he found that he really could not dodge. When Roddy kicked Basta, countless magic tendrils appeared behind him to support the ground, allowing him to explode with all the strength in his body. Basta's face was full of shock. Without a sound, he was sent flying. He floated in the air for 5 or 6 meters and smashed the shelf filled with water cups behind him. He was buried in the ruckus. Witcher advanced to level 59, Elemental Summoner level 29, Base level 25. Roddy's current total level was 113. Taking into account his exquisite equipment and countless attribute bonuses, based on pure attribute value, the dragons would never think that his strength was higher than the human form of Basta. Unlike the black dragon Hurlo, who was used to close combat, the frost dragon race's melee ability was not outstanding. Basta, who had not participated in many battles, never thought that Roddy would directly attack him. When he was kicked, his mind was filled with thoughts like, "This guy is crazy." However, when his body hit the ground, the pain and suffocation made him realize that his opponent was more than 10 times stronger than he had imagined. This blow broke Basta's understanding of humans and stunned his 4 dragons' friends. The dragon's ability to take hits was very strong, but Basta knelt on the ground for more than a second before he got up. As soon as he looked up, Roddy's second kick was already coming. He raised his hand to block, but his whole body was kicked into the air and smashed into the crystal wall behind him. "You, how dare you!" Chapter 1033. I've already killed 2 demigods. Who do you think you are? Roddy stepped forward. He had been in a bad mood for the past 2 days. After being in a high position, no matter how bad his mood was, Roddy was used to gritting his teeth and enduring it. However, he was ultimately a human and not a god. His nature was to seek revenge for the smallest grievance. Even if Basta was a dragon's, Roddy did not take him seriously. What's more, he was very clear that if he did not warn them today, all the efforts he had done for Iskar and the others would basically be for naught. If it was another time, Basta might not have taken this beating. However, the timing of his flattery was obviously not very good. Roddy chose the most direct solution among the countless solutions. A straight punch once again smashed towards Basta's face. Basta instinctively wanted to put his hands in front of his body to block, but he found that a strange force was firmly restraining his wrists. Basta panicked and desperately tried to pull away, but he found that he could not break free. He hurriedly lifted his legs to fight back, but both of his legs were also locked in place. Edith's figure had unknowingly appeared beside him. She stood there calmly, her eyes glimmering. Basta found that he had completely become a target. Just like that, Roddy's punch landed on his face. Bang! With a muffled sound, Basta seemed to have been hit by a hammer. His head suddenly tilted to one side, and the skin on his cheekbone broke, spilling a lot of blood. Aglé and the others then realized that Roddy was not bluffing. He stepped forward and said, "Prime Minister Roddy, what are you trying to do? Can't you tell what I'm trying to do?" Roddy turned his head and glanced at them. The magic tentacles behind him were fully extended, looking very terrifying. These few dragons did not know what to say. They wanted to go forward and help, but they had many concerns, because they were not stupid. They knew that this Prime Minister in front of them could not be touched at all. Roddy wasn't even interested in looking at this bunch of cowards. Basta opened his mouth to speak, but Roddy slapped the other side of his face. "Bah! Edith watched coldly from the side. The Grand Arcanist didn't even blink when the blood splashed in front of her. The power that imprisoned Basta came from the magic tower. This Frost Wyrm obviously did not have the power to resist the Grand Arcanist. From the very beginning, Roddy had never thought of a fair duel because he knew that violence could not solve all problems. However, for a force of this level, some things had to be slapped in the face in order to learn. One punch and one slap. Basta had lost his ability to think in anger. His eyes were red and he roared, trying to break free. "Kill me if you can. Otherwise, I will let you experience the wrath of the dragons." Boom! This time, Roddy didn't use his fist. Instead, he used his elbow to smash the other party's nose. The bones of the dragons were tough enough. This elbow didn't break the bridge of his nose, but there was a lot of nosebleed. The others finally couldn't stand it anymore. Aglé took a step forward and said in a deep voice, "Prime Minister, you're going too far." "Too far?" Roddy said as he rotated his arm, as if he was flexing his muscles. He turned to look at Aglé. "You guys don't know anything else, but you're quite good at making things difficult for others." He raised his hand and pointed at the 4 dragons in front of him. "The war is approaching. It's fine if you don't want to improve your strength. This isn't something I should care about anyway. But you guys could just eat and wait to die. Why did you have to come here to look for trouble?" "Prime Minister, what do you mean by that?" Roddy's tone was like a senior scolding a junior. How could the dragons keep their faces? Black Dragon Hurlo immediately stiffened his neck and took a step forward. "Do we need to ask you for instructions about where we go? We came to the magic tower to visit our friends, and we're going to get beaten up? Prime Minister Roddy, we address you as Prime Minister, but that doesn't mean the dragons are under your jurisdiction. Lord Victor will never forgive you for beating Basta up like this. Is what my father does something that you can decide?" Kardashian's voice made Love's words stop. Only then did he remember the other party's identity. He looked embarrassed. Then, his gaze swept over Basta, who had a nosebleed, and then looked at Edith, who was calm at the side. The dragons suddenly felt the pressure. Basta had already thrown caution to the wind. He cursed Roddy fiercely, but the Prime Minister did not let him off. He waved his hand and slapped Basta's face again. It was another crisp and loud slap. This blow stunned Basta. He wanted to continue, but Roddy kept slapping him like a spinning top. The 4 dragons who came with Basta could not stand it anymore. They rushed over to pull Roddy back, but Edith did not even raise her hand. She used an invisible boundary to isolate them. "Hey, if you want to fight, you have to think it through." Iskar, who was watching from the side, suddenly spoke at this time. Although his tone was calm, his hands were clenched into fists. It was because watching Roddy slap Basta was too satisfying. Not only him, but Rubens also smiled ferociously. "Are you really stupid, or are you pretending to be stupid? You still don't understand what is going on at this time?" Aglé was stunned. He thought for a few seconds, and his back was instantly covered with cold sweat. They had all considered the option of fighting, but Edith was watching from the side. These dragons' scalps went numb, and they realized a problem that they had neglected before. They were in the magic tower. In the magic tower, no matter how stupid the dragons were, they knew what would happen to them if they tried to show off in front of the owner of the magic tower. Before they came in, none of them thought that things would come to this. Iskar and the others were useless. Why did they need the Prime Minister to personally bring Edith out to support them? However, the current situation really made them feel very uncomfortable. They looked at each other, and Aglé braced himself and said, "Prime Minister, what do you want?" "The problem is not what I want." Roddy's palms were red. Today, he finally experienced what it meant to be a tough bone. Because of the great force, Basta's face had already swollen. This was definitely an unforgettable shame for him. After being beaten like this, Basta no longer cursed. Instead, He stared fiercely at Roddy and remained silent. Facing his gaze, Roddy did not even look at him. He walked in front of Aglé, twisted his red fingers, and whispered, "The problem is, if no one stopped you today, what would the result be? No matter what the result is, you are dead." Basta spat. His lips were cracked, but they had begun to heal in the past few minutes. Because of his anger, the veins on Basta's forehead bulged, and the muscles all over his body tightened. If it was not for Edith's confinement spell, he was afraid that he would have already rushed forward. Chapter 1034. Roddy's unhurried tone was far more intimidating than a roar. Basta felt an inexplicable chill in his bone marrow at this moment, but he quickly overcame all this. He gritted his teeth and said, "Are you threatening the dragons? Who gave you the guts?" "You are mistaken about one thing, Basta." A flat response sounded from behind him. Basta's eyes widened instantly. For a moment, he couldn't believe his own guess. Basta couldn't move his limbs at this time, but looking at the expressions of his four companions in front of him, Basta indeed had a feeling of being frozen by an extremely cold spell. Lord Victor, Aglé, Love, Nick, and Dean swallowed their saliva at the same time, then bowed respectfully. This Lord of the Frost Dragon race didn't walk in from outside the room, but from behind the broken crystal wall. He directly stepped into the room. With his movement, the crystal wall that was full of cracks also disappeared, revealing the spacious conference room behind. Crystal Dragon Lord Krupus sat on a chair next to it. Obviously, the entire wall just now was an illusion. On the other side, Black Dragon Hurlolord Procasto stared at these people and said in a deep voice, "You guys are quite capable." In addition to the three lords, there were 7 other elders of various races sitting at the long table. There were a lot of parchments on the table in front of them. Some of them were even holding strange bones, plants, or crystals. Obviously, this group of people was studying the problem of the demons. In the past 10 minutes or so, they could clearly see what Basta and the others were doing through the wall of illusion. Even with the soundproof enchantment, they could still hear what they said. At this time, their faces were very ugly. For the lords and elders, Basta and the others were no different from slapping them in the face. They had just made Kardashian and the others honorary elders, and then a group of juniors came out and ridiculed and even humiliated them. If this kind of thing were to spread, would the Lords of the Dragons still have any dignity to speak of? Although Basta was slapped by a human, it was not a glorious thing for the dragons. However, the dragons who were able to reach their current position were not fools like Basta. On one side, there were a few unimportant second-rate characters in the clan, and on the other side, there was the supreme leader of the human alliance. Most importantly, everything Roddy did was to protect the reputation of the 5 honorary elders of the dragons. With such a clear situation, they knew very well which side they should stand on. In fact, all the elders and lords present were responsible for what had happened. They had thought that the ceremony a few days ago was safe enough, but it turned out that they had underestimated the shamelessness of the idle people in the clan. The dragons claimed to be a higher race. Although they were strong, the construction of spiritual civilization was indeed a bit sloppy. Their power came from nature. Even if they were to be useless for life, they could still crush humans like ants. Therefore, people like Basta had long been a headache for the lords and elders. The elite dragons like Iskar, in the process of constantly tempering themselves, naturally developed a higher moral requirement through their understanding of various civilizations. In contrast, the ignorant and incompetent Basta and the others were like uncultured scoundrels. Reason? It would not make sense at all. Usually, when these guys harmed the lower races, the elders turned a blind eye and pretended that they did not see it. However, they did not expect this group of bastards to come and show off to their own people. This showed that the dragons also had the bad habit of everyone kicks a wall when it's down. They claimed to be a higher race, but now it seemed that they were really not that high. There were countless moments just now when the lords wanted to rush over and stop their unrestrained taunts, because what they had done was equivalent to trampling on the honorary lord title that the lords had announced. However, Lord Victor stopped the elders beside him. As Kardashian's father, even when Basta requested to keep her as his mistress, he kept his cool and did not show any signs of breaking out. Even when Roddy made his move, he still did not say a word. Instead, his tense face relaxed. After Roddy had slapped Basta until his face was covered in blood, he then signaled the people beside him to walk out of the enchantment. Lord Black Dragon Hurlo did not think too much, but Krupus knew, if Roddy really hit someone, it meant that there was room for discussion. On the other hand, if Roddy did not say anything, that would be the biggest problem. Krupus tilted his head from his seat, looked at the group of people in front of him, and said aloud, "Today's matter, we need to have a good talk." The originally noisy Aglé and the others were now silent. The only thing they could do was to bow to the lords and elders. "My lord." Basta's imprisonment was lifted by Edith. But now he no longer had the courage to take revenge on Roddy. Victor glanced at him, but did not look angry, just expressionlessly said, "Just stand here, I have something to ask all of you." Roddy used a towel in the lounge to wipe the blood on his hands. At this time, he very naturally greeted the group of big shots in front of him. "I did not control myself today. If I have offended the lords and elders, I hereby apologize." He spoke sincerely, as if he was willing to accept punishment, but these lords refused even more sincerely. Pucasto directly pointed at Louv and said, "This unmotivated thing has lost face here, I should be the one to apologize." Louv lowered his head and did not dare to say a word, like a child who had caused trouble. The others all stared at the ground, no longer looking as arrogant as they were just now. Roddy and the lords and elders exchanged pleasantries, but the hearts of these dragons became colder and colder. The scene of the lords making things difficult for Roddy did not happen at all. Instead, they were the first to be scolded. They did not even dare to sit, and obediently stood at the side to listen to the scolding. Because of the disappearance of the illusion, the area of the room was a lot larger. In addition, Victor's side was originally a conference room with a lot of chairs, so Victor directly waved at Kardashian and Iskar and the others. "Elders, please take a seat first. Today, I want to carefully listen to what they want to say." With that, he also invited Roddy to take a seat. When Edith's illusion also sat next to the elders, the entire room only left with Basta and the other four standing there. Continue. Chapter 1035. The topic of the essence of magic was too profound, but from a simple point of view, no matter how complicated magic was, it was still derived from the transformation of simple magic. Just like mathematics started from 1 + 1 is equal to 2, how could one understand linear algebra without learning the basic operation rules? Victor didn't continue to speak, but Clark, an elder of the Red Dragons, said, "I'm very curious, Aglé, why do you think you are qualified to laugh at Iskar's magic circle research?" As a member of the Red Dragons, he knew Aglé very well. The difference in magic level between this kid and Iskar was probably similar to the difference between a middle-rank magician and a magus. There was an obvious gap. Aglé couldn't even refute the question. But the elder didn't give up. "In order to perfect the forbidden spell of Great Meteor, it's normal for me to start from the simplest step of flame condensation." "What? If you see me studying the lowest level of flame condensation, will you also laugh at me for saying that my research is too basic and meaningless?" "Elder, I don't dare." The sweat on his forehead dripped to the ground. As soon as Aglé finished speaking, Clark raised his voice. "Why not? I'm just an elder, and so is Iskar. Do you think there's a big difference?" Of course there was a difference, but who dared to say there was a difference at this time? Iskar didn't look at Aglé. He slightly lowered his head and stared at the ground in front of him in a daze. For those who knew him well, Iskar's silence was actually a statement. If he begged for mercy, even if Aglé escaped today, Iskar would pretend that he didn't see it, which meant that he was extremely angry and didn't want to leave any leeway. After the Red Dragon Elder scolded Aglé, the other lords also stepped forward to reprimand their clansmen. Only Lord Victor ignored Basta. After everyone's faces turned ashen, he turned to look at Roddy. "Prime Minister, what do you think we should do with Basta?" These words immediately made Basta, who had been hoping for a fluke, tremble all over. At this time, he deeply regretted what he had just shouted at Roddy. But how could one take back the spilled water? Everyone heard his hysterical death threat, and there was no room to deny it. Roddy glanced at him as if he was looking at a dead man. Basta could not help but shout, "My lord! I admit my mistake. I admit my mistake. Please." Before he could finish, Roddy said calmly, "This is your clan's matter, my lord. I can't interfere. I'm more concerned about what the honorary elders will face in the future." He glanced at Kardashian. Sir Basta may have done it unintentionally. Although his words today were a little overboard, other than disgusting, it didn't cause much damage. But if similar situations happen every day, then I definitely can't accept it. "Prime Minister, we're sure," Pukatos hurriedly agreed, but saw Roddy waving his hand. "I'm not forcing the lords and elders to agree to anything. How about this? Some things can't always be hidden. Since this happened today, I'll invite everyone to visit the Strategic Arms Research Department. How about it?" The dragons were used to the Prime Minister controlling the rhythm of the conversation. Basta and his group of bastards were the ones who embarrassed themselves first, so the lords and elders naturally had to clean up their mess. They knew that it was impossible to shift the blame for this kind of thing. They had to admit it honestly so that everyone could continue to sit together and work together in the future. Moreover, visiting this laboratory had always been something that the lords and elders wished for. Although they didn't know why Roddy wanted to change the topic, they obviously thought that it was more meaningful to see the laboratory than to see those pieces of trash. They all agreed and then walked towards the laboratory under Roddy's lead. At this time, Roddy had returned to his usual gentle image. When he walked in front of Basta, he suddenly said, "The few of you don't stand here. Follow me and take a look." Aglé and the others looked at each other. Although they didn't understand why Roddy did this, how could they have a choice now? After the lords and elders nodded, they could only follow behind obediently. The swelling on Basta's face had subsided within a few minutes, but the blood that oozed out was still on his face. At this time, he understood the principle of acting pitifully to survive, so he didn't wipe it. However, when Victor walked in front of him, he coldly said, "Clean yourself up before you follow." This time, Basta could only cast a spell to clean himself up and walked behind dejectedly. After directly entering the laboratory from the lounge, the 10 lords and elders spread out and looked around. Kardashian and the others' main experimental instruments and equipment were all in the Dragon Tower. Therefore, what was carried out in this laboratory was mainly to perfect some theories and plans. In other words, they didn't make a physical missile like the Mark VI here, but formula calculations, model simulations, and some preliminary discussions about some ideas. Therefore, what Victor and the others saw were drawings, notes, and the huge blackboard in front of Kardashian's table. She had listed a series of formulas on it. One part was to calculate the relationship between the shape of the missile and the wind resistance, and another part was a list of high-density metals that had been filtered out. Next to it was the order of the experiment, including the strength test and so on. As the saying goes, the amateurs just watch the fun, while the experts see the artistry. Aglé and the others just glanced at it and sneered at it. The reason was that they saw that the magic circles made by Iskar and the others were all functional magic circles. Their purpose was not to be used directly in combat, but to test materials. This kind of magic circle was indeed not difficult, and its nature was exactly the same as making a balance or a vernier caliper. It was specially made to assist in the follow-up experiment. For example, under the influence of Kardashian, Iskar and the others had learned to use the set of standards in the laboratory on Earth to make magic circles. This allowed the control of precision to rise to an unprecedented height. Most of the elders of the dragons often used magic to measure the results of the experiment, and then used their brains to remember when to use it and when to calculate. However, Kardashian and the others had improved and created a special magic circle that was far more accurate than magic measurement. This was like the manufacturing industry moving the error from the millimeter level to the micron level. It didn't seem to make much difference, but in the high-end field, this step meant a wider sky. Chapter 1036. With Roddy's words, the group of old fellows were able to freely ask questions. At first, they still put on airs and asked some simple questions. The answers they got were all within their expectations. However, when Krupus asked about the metal alloy smelting, Stika and Eshin explained the heat treatment magic circle that they made together for a long time. This question obviously involved some very deep professional knowledge. Dragons usually did not need to forge or smelt anything because dragons had never needed armor or weapons. They trusted their claws and magic more. However, the strength that the Kalon kingdom had displayed in the war had caused them to gradually change their views. As lords and elders, they had already begun to research in this area. However, their theoretical knowledge came from the summaries of the humans, high elves, and other races. If they wanted to innovate, they could only make some simple improvements. There weren't many outstanding results. However, in this field, the Strategic Arms Research Department had accumulated a lot of research results in order to develop qualified missile shells. Krupus was originally curious about how to smelt. After listening for a while, he realized that the furnace they used was not ordinary at all. You mean, this improved furnace magic circle can accurately control the temperature and even adjust it quickly? Most people's concept of furnace was high temperature. The higher the temperature, the better. The dragons were more knowledgeable. They knew that some things needed to be controlled properly. However, the way they controlled it was to control the fire element. However, this led to a result. It was fine when the temperature was low, but the higher the temperature, the harder it was to control. A slight mistake would cause fluctuations, and the result would be a big error in the experiment. However, Eshin and the others had already made a furnace powered by crystal energy. The improved magic circle could easily stabilize the temperature. If they wanted to adjust it, they could directly operate on the magic circle. Moreover, the structure of their furnace was more advanced. The highest temperature that could be reached was an order of magnitude higher than the furnace that the lords and elders knew. After a few questions, most of the elders fell silent. The premise of teaching the younger generation was that one knew more than the other. However, it seemed that these young honorary elders had really done something that they could not do. Eshin, can this thing really achieve the effect you said? Lord Krupus couldn't help but ask. Dragon's magic wasn't omnipotent. It was not a problem for a fireball spell to reach 2000 degrees Celsius, but maintaining it for an hour was something that the current magic circle could not do. However, the combination of the furnace and the magic circle made them realize that it was possible. Your Lordship, this is the latest improvement plan. The furnace in the Dragon Tower can already achieve the effect you mentioned. Eshin's reply caused the group of elders to widen their eyes. They had finally realized that the things that this group of young dragons were researching were indeed more advanced than they had imagined. In some aspects, they had even surpassed this group of demigods. Precision was an important indicator of industrial standards, but physics theory was the foundation. The elders who were originally interested in the strategic missile quickly turned their attention to Kardashian's blackboard and note. The formulas and theorems left by countless great people on the earth were like shining gold, immediately attracting the elders' attention. Are these numbers? Lord Victor finally spoke. He had never seen Arabic numerals before, but he could guess their use. Yes, they correspond from 1 to 10. Kardashian stepped forward to explain, but Victor quickly pointed to the letter rho and asked, "What do these represent?" It is used to represent the density of an object. Density. Dragons also had a similar concept, but there had never been a unified name for it. This reaction was the same as when Kardashian first came into contact with it. Therefore, she patiently explained the meaning of the formula and the calculation method. When Victor saw countless materials classified according to their density, melting point, and other properties, the original intention of teaching had completely disappeared. The elders collectively fell silent. The content after that was more like a group of people asking questions in a professor's class. However, the person who answered was Kardashian, and the ones who asked questions were them. These formulas are also used to assist in the calculation. This is the draft of the calculation. You asked the method, I used calculus. Differentiation and integration are like this. The scattered formulas on the blackboard were asked one by one because these formulas looked simple, but the value behind them was difficult to estimate. Middle school students knew that F equals ma, but before Newton explored this law, scientists were basically studying philosophy or theology. The profound meaning of the three laws of mechanics was not understood by most people living in modern times. The shoulders of giants was not a joke. The sudden appearance of Kardashian's formulas in this era was no less than 10,000 nuclear bombs. The elders simply could not accept that the theorem that was applicable to almost everything was expressed in such a simple formula. The world was so complicated, how could it be calculated so carelessly? Of course, Kardashian did not tell them about quantum mechanics. After all, humans on Earth still had not found a unified theory that was applicable to gravity, electromagnetic force, and strong and weak interaction force. However, at the current level of research, the laws of macroscopic mechanics were sufficient. In order to better express this formula, Rubens began to use the existing experimental equipment to do demonstration experiments on the spot. Verifying the theorem F equals ma was very simple, so he, who hated data calculation, could easily do it. Not only that, the Black Dragon Hurlo could even explain Hooke's law to Lord Picasso. Of course, in this world, it was known as Kardashian's law. Actually, it's not just the choice of materials. After understanding this law, when facing an enemy, you can use the least amount of force to deal the most powerful blow. The Black Dragon Hurlo worshipped power, but not brute force. Lord Picasso could not help but clap his hands and sigh after hearing Rubens's word. According to this law, there is room for improvement in many spells, and the room is very big. While the conversation was lively, Roddy suddenly said, "If you have any questions, you can also ask. We are facing a common enemy, right?" After he said this, the elders and lords remembered that Basta and the other four were also following behind. However, they were like mutes after entering the laboratory. From the beginning to the end, they did not say a word. Seeing the scene of the lords and elders asking questions in front of Kardashian, anyone with a normal brain would understand what this meant. We can just listen by the side," Auglay stammered. Roddy stared at them for a while. When they were a little scared, he nodded and said, "Okay, the Strategic Arms Research Department is not open often. If you have any questions, take the opportunity to ask." Chapter 1037. Of course, nodding was just nodding. It was impossible for them to actually ask questions. These 5 fellows were second-rate in the clan. Usually they neglected magic research. It was difficult for them to explain a forbidden spell clearly. How could they have the ability to participate in this kind of discussion? Although the questions raised by these elders and lords were not difficult and could only be said to be at the level of high school students, but for dragons who had never come into contact with such knowledge, it was almost instinctive to go from point to surface. Krupus only needed to listen to the use of calculus for a moment and immediately extended it to the calculation of irregular surfaces, in the construction of illusory spells. It had to be said that compared to the basic rules of operation, calculus was a very awesome tool. Calculating curved surfaces was one aspect. Any continuous change problems encountered in the construction of spells could be solved using calculus. Compared to the stupid methods used by the lords and elders in the past, the things that this university student had learned in advanced mathematics were like clouds and mud. After all, this was a calculation method that could be applied in mechanics, astronomy, chemistry, biological engineering, and even economics. At this moment, when Krupus saw it, his eyes immediately lit up and he could not bear to put it down. If it's really that useful, then the problem we just talked about would probably be easily solved. Although the black dragon Hurlo had a fiery temper, the strength of Lord Pucasto was not just for show. After listening to Kardashian's explanation for more than 10 minutes, the first thing he thought of was the matter that they had just discussed in the meeting. Ah, what you said is true. With this kind of calculation method, the improvement of spells will probably be leaps and bounds. An elder immediately responded. This group of people at the scene had superb intelligence, far beyond what a university student could compare with. It was simply too easy for them to draw inferences about other things from one example. After listening, Roddy asked Victor, who was beside him, "Lord, have you encountered a problem? Is it convenient to talk about it?" "There's nothing inconvenient about that." Victor's mind was filled with the application of calculus at this time. When he heard his question, he casually replied, "We were discussing the problem of the demon carapace before. After demon body became bigger, the strength of his carapace far exceeded our expectations. Most spells, including your crystal cannons, can't penetrate his armor. In order to deal with this situation, we are now discussing how to use the most effective method to attack this defense." Hearing his words, Kardashian and the others looked at each other strangely, but did not say anything. The Lord of the Black Dragon Hurlo was impatient. Seeing their expressions, he immediately asked, "What, are you also researching this?" Truth be told, the Strategic Arms Research Department is also working on similar projects. At first, Kardashian wanted to say similar, but immediately realized that it was not appropriate, so she hurriedly said similar. She was afraid of causing some misunderstanding, but she underestimated the magnanimity of this group of lords and elders. They were not people who needed to cheat funds from the research institute. Hearing Kardashian's words, they suddenly became curious. Is it convenient to share the results?" After saying this, the 5 honorary elders collectively looked at Roddy, because this thing was casually mentioned by Roddy a few days ago. Whether to make it public or not depended on him. As the person in charge of the research institute, the Prime Minister's expression was very calm when being stared at by so many people. "Of course, no problem. We naturally also hope that the lords and elders can give us some pointers." These words were not a problem before, but now, when he said it, the elders understood that he was being humble. In terms of research level alone, just the scattered information displayed just now was enough to scare them. So, Kardashian flipped the blackboard, only then did everyone realize that the other side was also filled with words, and at the same time there were also a few diagrams. Stika took out a few models from the other side of the laboratory. From the shape, it looked like another form of armor-piercing bullets, but it was different from the small-caliber armor-piercing bullets that Roddy prepared for the crystal cannon previously. After the model was made according to the scale, it was at least a meter long. In other words, it was similar to the anti-tank armor-piercing bullets on Earth. Not to mention its shape and structure, just taking out and explaining how to fire this thing took a few minutes. For this reason, Roddy even reassembled the crystal cannon for them to see. First, we developed armor-piercing bullets that can be fired from turret. In the future, based on this result, we will research long-range armor-piercing missiles. Prime Minister, we all know that the power of your crystal cannon is not small, but the problem now is the carapace. Pucasto used the earth element to condense a hemispherical surface on the spot. For this curved carapace, whether it is spells or your cannonballs, there is a high probability that they will bounce off, and I'm afraid that the power will be greatly reduced. Simply making the cannonball this sharp may not be good. Roddy glanced at it and smiled at this question. Coincidentally, the things that the honorary elders are researching are to solve this problem. He took a step back, leaving the stage to Kardashian and the others behind him. The five of them discussed in low voices, then began to each take charge of a piece, and in order, they explained the intricacies of this armor-piercing bullet. In fact, the model in front of them was only the core of the armor-piercing bullet, which was made of high-strength, high-density metal. As the few of them temporarily condensed the shell, using the elements, the group of elders and lords finally understood what was going on with the capped armor-piercing bullet. This was actually wrapping a blunt end of a relatively soft material on the outside and front of the bullet core. With this kind of structure, when the front of the armor-piercing bullet hit the target, the softer part of the material would cause a certain amount of damage to the armor and at the same time cause a deformation. During the deformation process, the angle of incidence of the entire armor-piercing bullet would change accordingly. Under the effect of the force, the high-strength bullet core at the back would hit the target at a more vertical angle, thus reducing the probability of it being bounced off. This was the most widely used anti-tank armor-piercing bullet structure on Earth during World War II. Because it had the lowest technical content, but the effect was outstanding, to the point that even today, tanks in many countries were still using it. Roddy was not a military fanatic, but he had a wide range of knowledge. He had seen this thing on Weibo, and at that time, he only felt that it was novel, but he did not remember the specific model or structure. Now he suddenly remembered that he could not tell how many types of armor-piercing bullets there were, but he remembered the basic principle of the capped armor-piercing bullet. With this as a direction to guide, Kardashian and the others naturally made rapid progress in their research. After listening to the explanation, the lords and elders were all skeptical. Warheads made of different materials can make the warheads automatically align. Chapter 1038. Before the experiment began, Kardashian suggested a test group and a control group. Hence, the lords arranged for 12 groups of projectiles to collide with each other. The elders at the scene set up magic circles and enchantments. After fixing the shooting angle and shooting speed, they bombarded the targets to their heart's content. Roddy calmly watched them verify the result. However, Stika and Rubens were a little impatient. They craned their necks to watch, afraid that something might go wrong. The experiment ended after more than 2 hours because the lords had temporarily increased the number of control groups to 50 in order to confirm the result. The final result showed that 36 out of 50 armor-piercing bullets with a quilt-like structure nailed into the ice armor. As for the control group, 42 ordinary bullets bounced off. In fact, the material selection for the armor-piercing bullets was still a long way off. However, the bullets that Lord Pucasto had congealed according to the plan did show that the quilt-like structure was useful. They could clearly see the changes in the angle of the bullets without the need for a high-speed camera. All the previous doubts disappeared completely, and all that was left was endless exclamation. The strength of science lies in its repeatability. Whether you believe it or not, the results were there. There was no need to say anything more. While they had been experimenting for half a day, Bast and the others had been staring at them like background characters for the whole afternoon. Up until now, the few of them had understood one thing. The 5 honorary elders whom they mocked and ridiculed just now had easily solved the problem that the 3 overlords and 7 elders were vexed about. If they were individually weak, they might have the right to look down on them. However, in the face of such results, Love, who was originally a little unconvinced, lowered his head obediently. He did not think that Lord Picasto was useless. Looking at how they surrounded him, and marveled at the results of the experiment, Love sighed softly. He just wanted to learn the spell to disappear on the spot and leave this place as soon as possible. However, this was obviously unrealistic. Time flies. Lord Victor turned his head and looked at the image displayed on the crystal wall. Their discussion lasted until sunset. A group of people were still gathered around learning advanced mathematics. That's right, they were really learning, because these things were completely beyond the current level of knowledge of the dragons. Hearing his exclamation, the lords and elders beside him coughed a few times in embarrassment. Roddy had already sat down with a cup of water. He stood up and said, "How about this? Let's go to the cafeteria to have a meal and take a break to digest the knowledge. What do you think?" He did not directly say, "That's all for today," which meant that he left some leeway. Picasto was the first to respond. "The Prime Minister has arranged it well. Today has been an eye-opener. I've learned a lot from the 5 honorary elders." The previous humiliation of the honorary elders was largely due to the negligence of the lords. Naturally, they had to make up for it. As soon as he opened his mouth, the other dragons, of course, put in good words for him. Roddy found it funny to see these powerful old dragons flattering him. However, the status of Kardashian and the others alone was not enough to make these arrogant guys humble themselves. At the end of the day, knowledge and formulas were the most powerful trump card. Roddy's proposal was approved. The group of lords and elders moved directly to the cafeteria. Herchino's cafeteria had been expanded several times and was not small. Because Rhodey had requested that there be no special treatment, there was no separate private room. Even former lords like Morales and Cuello had to find a place to eat with their trays of food. Therefore, when the 3 lords, Victor, Picasto, and Krupus, a group of elders, and Prime Minister Roddy came to the cafeteria together, the other dragons who were preparing to eat could see them sitting down. Dragons had their own status, but the rules of the magic tower were still there. The lords still had to eat at the big table. Therefore, the order of seating became another manifestation of status. Logically speaking, the 3 lords were the most respected. There was no doubt that Roddy would sit at the same position opposite them. However, when they saw Kardashian and the others also sitting next to Roddy, the dragons not far away suddenly stopped what they were doing. Honorary Elder had always been another name for consolation prize in their eyes. People like Basta, who had long wanted to replace them, even mocked them as trash. Dragons respected strength, and the lords could not stop this kind of thing. However, this suddenly happened today in the cafeteria where everyone could see. The guys who were still chatting around suddenly turned their eyes over, and their faces were full of disbelief. Edith had already asked the kitchen to prepare delicious dishes. The 5 dragons were all present and each had different tastes. However, because the magic tower had been hosting the dragons for nearly half a year, the dishes they brought out were praised by the elders. However, they were not here to flatter. Dragons also liked to talk at the table, and with Roddy leading the conversation at the main table, halfway through the meal, he talked about 2 things with the group of dragons present. Of course, this was not a big deal because the lords of the green and red dragons were not present, and it was not appropriate to talk about strategic matters. Roddy first brought up the matter of patent protection. This was actually a supplementary agreement to the current kingdom of Karen Magic Circle and even the Scientific Research Circle. For example, things like armor-piercing bullets, the lords and elders will certainly want to use them when they go back for research. However, this involves the issue of patent. It's like a formula. If you want to use it, you first have to ask the original owner if he agrees, right? This sounded a little like business is business, but the lords were already used to his style of speaking. Victor replied, of course. The structure patent of armor-piercing bullets belongs to the Strategic Arms Research Department. Even if we want to use it, we have to ask the Prime Minister if he agrees first. That's what I mean. However, everyone here is not an outsider. I will naturally give this patent to the 5 dragons for free. After Roddy finished speaking, the lords in front of him all raised their eyebrows. After all, this Prime Minister would never give out free benefit. Since he was giving something, he must have a motive. Pucasto ate the steak in front of him and said, "Prime Minister, do you mean that we can carry out research and expansion on the basis of this structure in the future?" Chapter 1039. Seeing that the time was ripe, Roddy put forward his idea. That's right. All the lords have to do is to sign on the patent authorization letter to prove that the patent was handed over by the research department. Does this mean that those without the authorization letter have no right to use it? Yes, this is the intellectual property I was talking about. In the future, there will be a special law. Anyone who violates it will be punished according to the law. After listening to Roddy's answer, Victor immediately understood his intention. He was setting up rules. The phrase "first-class enterprises set the standard" was not a lie. When Elson City became the authority of magic, from the establishment of magazines and periodicals to the sales of all kinds of magic tools, the whole country began to follow Elson City as the wind vane. The business interests and trade surplus behind this were not something that small merchants and peddlers could imagine. From a certain point of view, the one who made the rules was always the one who benefited the most. What Roddy was doing now was to set up new legal rules. He briefly explained that the extension of this was actually similar to the Intellectual Property Office. By establishing a patent protection system on the surface, it was to provide protection to the patent makers to prevent their rights and interests from being infringed. But in fact, in the name of protection, these patents were in the hands of the government in advance at a very low cost. This was something that a powerful government could easily do. In this era, patent included all kinds of things, from big magic spells to small leather processing method. In the past, if the patent was plagiarized and caused a dispute, the party who was plagiarized could only suffer in silence. Once Roddy announced that his personal patent was protected as long as his patent was submitted to the Intellectual Property Office for examination and approval in a certain format, then the patent could be protected for a certain period of time. If someone used it without authorization, he would be punished directly according to the law. Hearing this idea, Victor and the others finally understood why Roddy gave them this patent for free. This was completely using the Lord's name to build momentum for the Intellectual Property Office and the upcoming law. Just imagine, even the Lord of the Dragons obediently signed the authorization letter. Who else in the Kingdom of Karen would have the guts to go against Roddy's government? The other feudal lords were relieved. After all, how could Roddy be a boorish person who would impulsively punch someone? It would be strange if he did not have other interests and goals behind his beating of Basta. But they really did not care about this. Basta deserved to be beaten. According to the elders' opinion, this kind of villain who took advantage of others was still not punished lightly. Therefore, Victor and the other lords looked around to make sure that everyone nodded in agreement. Right, the formulas and theorems that the honorary elders have taught today, although they seem simple, I feel that there are still a lot of extension and application problems. I wonder when you will have the time to teach them in detail again? Krups made a request. I'm very interested in what you call advanced mathematics, but it sounds like there's also low-level mathematics? It seems that you have come up with a set of systematic things? Roddy already knew that they could not hold back, but his reply was rather reserved. This depends on whether the honorary elders have time, but if it is possible, I would suggest that they take some time to hold a few lectures. Lords and elders, if you have time, would you like to attend them regularly? In fact, it would be the easiest to write it down in a book, but how could Roddy agree so easily? As soon as he said this, the lords immediately said, "As long as you let us know, we will go to attend any time." Then everyone should prepare well for the lecture. Don't be stumped by the questions in the lecture. Roddy turned his head and said to Iskar with a smile. The 5 honorary elders nodded shyly, including Kardashian. At this moment, the 5 of them were a little dizzy. How did they suddenly become professors giving lectures to the lords and elders? Who would have thought that just a few hours ago, they were still worrying about the improvement of those few magic circles? And at this time, while they were thinking about this, they did not know that the other dragons behind them, who were pricking up their ears, had their jaws drop. In the past, they had only heard of the lords and elders teaching the younger generation. Who would have ever heard of the younger generation teaching the elders? The dragons around them had already finished their meal, but they brought their drinks over and slowly sipped, obviously wanting to hear the follow-up content. And to their disbelief, Lord Victor did not seem to be joking. He even discussed for a long time about the arrangement of the classes of the honorary elders, and they did not understand many of the terms. Looking at the elders next to him, who were also humbly asking for advice, this scene was obviously not an act. 1 or 2 of them might be fishy, but 3 lords and 7 elders of the 5 dragons were like this. How could it be fake? There were also some who were curious about why Basta and the others were at the end of the table. Logically speaking, these people were not qualified to sit at the same table as the Lord. Looking at their anxious expressions, it was obvious that this meal was not a good one. But when the meal was about to end, the surrounding dragons who were eavesdropping finally understood what had happened. Prime Minister, what happened to Basta and the others today will never happen again. Chapter 1040. For dragons who had a much longer lifespan than humans, this kind of punishment did not seem to be too severe. But Roddy knew that Lord Victor had a very precise grasp of the situation. It was unrealistic to use measures such as beating, scolding, and corporal punishment on dragons. Putting aside the fact that having thick skin and flesh would not be effective, simple humiliation would not only be meaningless, but it would also easily trigger a rebellious mentality. Basta was a dragon's after all. If he could not bear the humiliation and was forced into a corner, he would be forced to carry out unscrupulous terrorist attacks all over the kingdom. Not to mention Roddy, even the Lord would not be able to stop him. Locking up Basta would not only ruin his plans for Kardashian, but also prevent him from causing trouble for Roddy for the next 50 years. To be honest, it was unknown how long the current alliance between humans and dragons could last. If everyone broke up, this band would probably become invalid immediately. All good things must come to an end. Roddy was not a childish teenager. He knew that Victor was more expressing his attitude. This was what he needed the most at the moment. As expected, with the Frost Lord's stance, Krupus and Procasto immediately gave a similar punishment, which was also 50 years. Although the lords of the red and green dragons were not present, the elders still had the right to punish the members of the clan who overstepped their bounds. Therefore, the 5 dragons who were here today would have to obediently return to the dragon domain for the next few decades. At this point, Roddy knew when to stop. He would not say whether this punishment was appropriate or not. He just changed the topic and talked for a while about teaching next week before leaving. When he and Edith left together, only the dragons were left at the dining table. As for how this group of people would be rewarded and punished, Roddy no longer cared. Thank you for your hard work today. If it weren't for the Magic Tower's flexibility, I wouldn't have been able to use it as a pretext today. Roddy thanked the Grand Arcanist in the corridor. The Grand Arcanist maintained his usual composure and only smiled. It's appropriate to say that you're using this as a pretext. The Prime Minister is much more capable than the High Elves I've seen. The Kingdom of Karen will prosper under your leadership. These words sounded like flattery, but Roddy knew that she wasn't the kind of person who flattered others. Since she said it, it must be her true feelings. Because of this, he was naturally in a good mood. After a few words of modesty, he suddenly thought of something and asked, "By the way, what do you think about the matter I mentioned before? It's been a long time since I've taught anyone. However, we're facing a common enemy. If my efforts can be of use, I will naturally do my best." Hearing her reply, Roddy felt relieved. He nodded and let her do other things first. With so many dragons around, Edith had to personally oversee a lot of things. Although he had assigned a lot of housekeepers to help manage, Edith still needed to personally oversee a lot of things. Walking alone in the corridor of the upper floor, Roddy slowly exhaled and began to think about the gains and losses. Today's incident was sudden, but judging from the outcome, his response was still good. Beating up Basta was part of the plan. To be honest, Roddy had long wanted to beat up this bastard. However, the Prime Minister couldn't just beat someone up to vent his anger. Having controlled the situation of a country for a long time, Roddy had learned to look 10 steps ahead before taking one step. Therefore, the subsequent action of justifying the title of Honorary Elder could be said to have been done in one go. However, there were still some accidents. The idea of armor-piercing bullets and patent protection were put forward on a whim. These things were originally things that could only be implemented a few years later in his plan. However, with such a perfect opportunity, he naturally couldn't let it go. Opportunities were always given to those who were prepared. Roddy had come this far, and he knew that this was not a lie. However, the result of strategizing was that his energy was haggard. Roddy rubbed between his eyebrows, pushed the door open, and went to his laboratory. After asking the servant to pour water, he left. Jingle noticed the movement and immediately crawled over and rubbed against his leg. In the past, Roddy would have asked her to stand up. However, he was mentally exhausted today. He was too lazy to even speak. He sat in front of the armchair in silence. Then, he stared at the cup of water on the coffee table in a daze. Although everything was on the right track, Roddy's heart was still weighed down by a stone. When he thought of Sally's situation, he had an inexplicable sense of urgency. On the other side of the magic tower, after the meal, the dragons dispersed. Kardashian was stopped by her father. The two came to a corner. The Lord cast a soundproof magic circle and said, "I can see that you agree with Prime Minister Roddy very much." Then he added, "I'm afraid those formulas are all related to him, right?" This stunned Kardashian. As a lord, her father was not an idiot like Basta. She had nothing to hide. She nodded and said, "He put forward some ideas, and I helped to improve and summarize them." She would not say the secret of the space and time prison. Although the advanced calculus she showed today was powerful, it was not enough to subvert her father's understanding. If she brought out something more profound, she was afraid that Victor would not believe this explanation at all. To put it bluntly, these things shown in the laboratory today were only some of the commonly used theorems in macroscopic physics. Chapter 1042. Dragons were not as secretive as humans, especially when it came to the relationship between the Lord and his children. They were too lazy to probe carefully. Victor did not seem to be surprised by this answer. Kardashian carefully observed her father's expression, but the feudal lord did not show any emotions on his face. For a few seconds, he did not reveal any information at all. At this point, Kardashian understood that she was still young. Roddy is indeed outstanding in his own way. After a long time, Victor suddenly spoke. His affirmation made Kardashian raise her eyebrows. It sounded like a compliment to Roddy, but such words were often foreshadowing, and the real content was after the but. In 3 years, he left his identity as a scout and became the actual ruler of a country. In magic and in some fields, he has the right to speak that even the dragons have to face. In the entire history of the human race, this is too unusual. After saying this, Victor finally said, "But is this the reason why you like him?" In the past, Kardashian had always been too lazy to analyze the ways of the world. Now, however, she was racking her brain to think, because her answer would not only determine Rhodey's future relationship with Victor, but it could also affect the Kowloon Kingdom and even the entire human world. After a few seconds of hesitation, she finally answered, saying that I like him is actually just a vague feeling. As for the specific reason, I'm afraid I can't show it. But there are some things that I think I can talk to my father about. After a pause, Kardashian continued, I have a very strong feeling that his vision is far from the short-sightedness of the human race. Many times, he sees further than the dragons, such as the things about the demons. There is a saying that facts speak louder than words. Without Roddy's help these few times, I'm afraid that the entire dragons would become a laughingstock. To put it bluntly, he might even become an accomplice to the destruction of the continent. The things that Roddy did seem to be coincidences, but how can there be so many coincidences in the world? Every time he turned the tide in a crisis, wasn't it because he was prepared before? At this point, Victor replied, there's nothing wrong with this judgment. In this aspect, Roddy is much better than many dragons. Yeah, sometimes I wonder if he's a dragon's disguised as a human. Kardashian sounded like she was joking, but neither she nor her father laughed. The liege's daughter, who had lost her dragon crystal, continued to elaborate on her reasons. Now, for example, the dragons and humans seem to be on the same side because of the common enemy, the demon. The 5 major dragons have never been so united for thousands of years, but is the internal reason really all due to external factors? I don't think so. Victor narrowed his eyes. He suddenly changed the topic from a relationship issue to an analysis of current politics. It was a little like an antelope hanging its horns. He didn't say anything and nodded to his daughter to continue. I thought about it for a long time and finally realized that when Roddy made all the decisions, he didn't seem to consider the problem from the perspective of the class he represented like other human leaders. What he cares about seems to be far more than just a human country. After saying this, Kardashian fell silent. The reason sounded like Roddy had a high vision, but the meaning behind it was worth Victor pondering. I see. Victor replied after a moment and then removed the soundproof enchantment. Then wait for 3 years. Kardashian nodded and then watched her father leave. After a long time, she breathed a sigh of relief. It was really unexpected to suddenly have a showdown with her father. But the result was not too pessimistic, because the 3 years meant that Victor would observe for 3 years. This was already a very lenient answer. Kardashian never thought that her father would give in on this matter, but obviously, her specious answer had an effect. As for what the effect was, perhaps only the liege himself knew. She stood in the same place for a few minutes, and Iskar came over with a few people. What are you thinking about? Kardashian came back to her senses and rubbed her eyebrows. Nothing, a little private matter. Seeing Iskar and the others beaming with joy, she smiled and said, but today is really a relief. This bunch of trash, I didn't think they would really be dealt with one day, ha. Her words made everyone laugh. Because Basta and the others were not only punished, the most important thing was that the group of honorary elders had obtained a real status that was truly recognized. The depression in everyone's heart had dissipated, and now they just wanted to have a drink. Where's Roddy? Let's go. Let's find him for a drink. Although Rubens's voice was low, it could not hide the excitement in his heart. Hey, I'll remember that guy Love's expression. Damn, I can feel good for the rest of my life after today. Directly calling Roddy by his name instead of Prime Minister was a sign of their close relationship. Even Eshin, who had always been unsmiling, was making a ruckus at the side. I reckon he's secretly happy in the lab. Being able to beat Basta up and even get praised by the feudal lord, this must be the first human to do so, right? Ha ha ha, I guess it's true. The 5 honorary elders laughed as they walked out of the cafeteria and went straight upstairs to find Roddy. At this time, Basta and the others no longer had the face to stay there, so they obediently left the magic tower and returned to their respective territories to serve their sentences. The elders, on the other hand, returned to their own conference room and focused on studying the structure of the hooded armor-piercing bullet. According to the daily routine of the Strategic Arms Research Department, it was already time to get off work. After a few words of discussion, each of them took a few bottles of wine from the cafeteria, went all the way upstairs, and knocked on the door of Roddy's lab. The servant opened the door, and after seeing the 5 honorary elders, he quickly greeted them and then invited them in. This was because Roddy had already said that Kardashian and the others did not need to report back and forth when they came in. Inside the room, Roddy was writing something at the desk, but compared to usual, he looked very tired today. When they entered the room, they looked at him and silently put the bottles of wine on the table next to him. At a glance, Roddy knew what was going on, and he put down the quill in his hand. Congratulations to everyone. After saying that, he went to ask the servant to bring glasses, but at this time, Kardashian said, "Everyone's alcohol tolerance is average, just a little is enough." Yes, don't drink until you get up tomorrow, that will be a waste of time," said Iskar, and Rubens also added, "Tomorrow, the liege will ask questions, let's have a drink to celebrate." Before losing the dragon crystal, Rubens was like a barrel of wine. But today, he was the first to say that he wanted to control himself. The others agreed one after another, chatted with Roddy for a while, and sat on the sofa next to him. After what happened today, if they saluted and thanked him again, it would actually seem like hypocrisy. So, after sitting and chatting for a long time, no one specifically said, "Thank you," or anything like that, picked up a glass of wine, and many things had already been said without words. Chapter 1043. Roddy, shall we continue to study these topics? About the lectures, how should we arrange them? Iskar put down his glass and asked what they were all concerned about. I'm afraid you'll have to work hard for the next few days. Sort out the notes into a lesson plan, talk about it a little, and then compile a set of teaching materials for internal use. Roddy was very familiar with this. These theories will be researched by scholars. There is no need for all of you to do the hard work of promoting them. As users, the current focus is on how to cache these advanced theories and knowledge. Cache? Do you mean turning knowledge into money? Rubens laughed. Is the kingdom of Karen short of money now? It has just unified such a large territory, and with Tasman, as long as it is stable for a few years, the national treasury will definitely be full. This was also the judgment of most people, but Roddy shook his head. Have you forgotten? I borrowed money to fight the war. Now, not only do I have to repay the debt, but after I hold the power in the central government, the feudal lords will no longer be in charge of their own affairs. Therefore, the cost of management in the first few years will not be low. If not for the fact that the war ended smoothly and saved a lot of money from Lassman, we probably won't even have to think about maintaining the road construction. The reason why the economic lifeline was called the lifeline was that the economic foundation determined the superstructure. It was said that political power comes from the barrel of a gun. Without money to buy a gun, what could they do? Roddy suddenly brought up such an important matter. In fact, he had already expressed his attitude. The 5 honorary elders in front of him were worthy of him confiding in them about these confidential matters. They were not stupid. Rubens paused for 2 seconds and understood the key point. He sat up slightly. What do we need to do? The others didn't have any objections to what he said. That was because the honorary elder and Prime Minister Rhodey were now bound together for good or ill. There is a time limit for repayment of debts, and the interest is bearable. If things develop smoothly, paying off Lassman will not be a problem. As Roddy spoke, he picked up the proposal he had just written and roughly looked at the outline on it. He continued, but the problem now is that all of these are theoretical values. There will always be a big difference in reality. If there are any accidents, I'm afraid there will be a crisis. After saying that, he began to elaborate on his solution. Actually, since the beginning of the war, we've already created many things that are ahead of the times. Both the airplanes and the crystal cannons have been put to practical use on the battlefield, and their effectiveness has been verified. Next, I will consider selling a portion of the weapons or technology to Lassman or other countries. The price and profit of these things are not comparable to ordinary swords. Roddy's train of thought was very clear. In his memory, there was a movie called King of War, which told the story of an arms dealer who made a fortune from war. Although the story ended with the main character's family breaking up, the essence of the story was very simple. There was no lack of war in any world, and selling weapons was always one of the most profitable industries. Kardashian was deeply moved by this. She also knew that on Earth, the governments of many countries were controlled by plutocrats, and at the same time, these plutocrats had close ties with arms. Many wars were fought in the name of faith, but the instigators were always for the sake of profit. The patent protection system is the path I've paved for my future plans. I don't think we should be in a hurry to develop a high-precision weapon like the strategic guided missile right now. On the contrary, our first task is to develop something with low technical content and low manufacturing cost to facilitate the early arms trade. Roddy explained a lot to them. In fact, what he was doing was similar to that of a certain hegemonic country. Weapons that were on the elimination list would be sold to those countries that were lagging behind in order to recover the research and development costs and even profit. As long as they could ensure that they always had the most advanced weapons and competitiveness, under the situation of information asymmetry, this method could definitely make up for the deficit in the national treasury. Just think about the other regions of the continent, countries that were still in the primitive era of cold weapons. How could they reject the terrifying power of the crystal cannons? Of course, airplanes could not be sold, but what about trucks? A truck that could travel thousands of kilometers continuously and had a carrying capacity comparable to dozens of carriages. No matter how much it was sold, there would probably be countries fighting to buy it. Arms are really a good business. After listening to Roddy's words, stick aside. The knowledgeable dragons certainly knew the extent of the huge profits involved. However, the Prime Minister had a good saying: science and technology are the first productive forces. Knowledge that could not be seen or touched should have such an effect. Of course, that is the first stage. Because the technical content is relatively low, I think that in a year and a half, everyone should be able to get it done. After that, the time will be more ripe for us to ponder about missiles. After Roddy finished speaking, he flipped through the book and paused for a few seconds. After this, there is another very important matter that I will tell everyone today. His tone became serious, and the originally relaxed honorary elders immediately sat up straight. Roddy did not immediately reveal the plan, but called Edith over. After the Grand Arcanist stood still, he solemnly said, "Although the Lord and the elders will definitely put this on the agenda, I think the construction of the counterattack against the demon portal, we must do it ourselves." That night, the Prime Minister and the honorary elders spoke a lot, and everyone dispersed in the early hours of the morning. As usual, Kardashian stayed behind, but this time, she was not like before, looking for a reason to cover up. She had already confessed the matter to her father, and Lord Victor did not object, only saying, "Observe." This meant that it was actually not a big deal for her to disclose this information. After listening to the conversation between her and Victor, Roddy rubbed his eyebrows helplessly. He originally thought that this would be a difficult matter, but he did not expect that today it would feel like, when the conditions are right, success will be achieved. Thinking about it carefully, the request of Basta to take Kardashian as a lover must have made Lord Victor feel helpless. The dragons who did not have the strength to back them up could not stop this kind of thing at all. After one Basta left, there might be 9 towers, 10 towers. Previously, Roddy thought that it would be difficult for Kardashian, who had lost the dragon crystal, to propose a marriage, but now that the status of the honorary elder had risen, if the two of them really loved each other, then betrothing Kardashian to Roddy was already a choice that this lord could consider. In the end, the status of humans today is still different. What you have done has already changed my father's impression of humans. Kardashian counted with her fingers. Since Roddy appeared in the sight of the dragons, he had indeed turned the tide more than once. But now, the Prime Minister was not in the mood to be proud. He just sighed. Father-in-law wants to observe for 3 years, I have to work hard. This amused Kardashian. She reached out and pinched Roddy's nose. Look at you, dream on. Chapter 1044. Roddy was also thinking about this. With his first wife's reminder, he sighed softly. The situation doesn't look good. I need to observe for a few days. With that, he sent Kardashian out of the lab. His first wife went to her bedroom to rest. Roddy looked at the time. It was already early in the morning. Sally should be asleep by now. But he still went to the Queen's room not far away and asked the servant at the door. Her Majesty is not asleep yet. The servant outside the door reported in a low voice. Roddy froze for a moment and then asked her to go in and report. Soon, he saw the Queen in front of the fireplace in the living room. The High Elf Magic Tower originally had no fireplace, but this place had been remodeled according to the original Lucifron Ducal Palace. It wasn't exactly the same, but the sense of intimacy made Sally like it very much. This was what Roddy had said casually, and Edith had carried it out very thoroughly. The fireplace didn't need any firewood because the temperature in the magic tower was already pleasant. The fireplace here only had a magic circle that emitted heat. Sally sat in an armchair in front of the fireplace, her face pale. Seeing Roddy come in, she wanted to get up but was held down. It's so late. Why aren't you sleeping? Roddy felt a little sorry for her. He quickly walked to Sally and held her hand. The Queen was usually full of energy, but now she looked tired and her hand was unusually cold. I couldn't sleep in bed, so I sat for a while. Sally tried to smile. I heard you've been talking with the dragons. How is it? Although she said that, Roddy knew that she must have been worried and had been waiting here all this time. It's all within expectations. It's not a big deal. Talking about these things with the dragons was a milestone achievement, but Roddy was not interested in boasting with her. He was worried about Sally's condition and asked, Is there anything wrong with your body? I wouldn't say that I'm uncomfortable. It's just that I feel weak all over. When I close my eyes, I feel a little dizzy. Sally told him the truth. She was wearing a loose nightgown and sitting next to him, casually leaning against the back of the chair. This posture was a little lazy, but Roddy knew that she would not be like this in the past. If there was no one around, she would sit on his lap and talk. This abnormality made Roddy purse his lips slightly. In fact, he had asked her a few times before and knew that the debuff did not cause her any unbearable pain. However, it was obvious that Sally had not been resting well for the past few days. After such a long time, even an Iron Man would not be able to bear it. Is the scepter still not reacting? Roddy glanced over. The viper's kiss was leaning against Sally's leg, but its aura was now restrained, and it looked like an ordinary wooden stick. I'm afraid we'll have to wait for a long time. Sally shook her head and then spoke of her worries. I even suspect that it can't wake up anymore, because no matter what I do, I can't get any response, not even a sign of improvement. Because Sally slept late, the bags under her eyes were very obvious. Her sleepy eyes drooped, but she still forced herself to talk to Roddy. This scene made his heart ache, but there was nothing he could do. He reached out and picked up the scepter to take a look. In his vision, the words, Viper's Kiss, had turned gray, which meant that the attributes and writing on it were no longer valid. The quest panel did not trigger the relevant mission, and he could not find any clues elsewhere. Roddy was a little anxious. He thought for a moment and whispered, I'll go and ask Lord Morlars. At least it won't be a problem to let you have a good sleep. Sally pulled him back. If you want to sleep, there are many ways. There are also divine spells. I just don't feel like sleeping now. Well, then I'll accompany you. Roddy did not ask anything else. He just asked the maid to bring warm milk tea. The two were silent for a moment, and then Sally said, Will the kingdom become strong in the future? Yes, the kingdom of Karen is destined to become the overlord of this world. The standard of living of the people will get higher and higher, and everyone will be able to eat. After he finished, Sally looked at the magic circle in the fireplace. I'm afraid that father never thought of such a future. In the end, she added in a low voice, I don't know if I can live to see that day. Roddy was horrified. These calm words made his back break out in cold sweat. Turning his head, he found that Sally was smiling at him, but her expression was far from her usual cheerful and sunny expression. Instead, it was a stiff smile that she was trying hard to maintain despite her reluctance. Roddy, I feel that, this time, we may not be able to make it. Sally's voice was very calm, but she said the truth that he had been worried about but had been hiding. Roddy suddenly clenched his fists, and then quickly loosened them. He frowned and replied, Don't talk nonsense. His tone was a little heavy. Roddy then tried to ease it. I have come into contact with the power of the gods. Artifacts and gods are not the same. This problem is not without a solution. You haven't slept well for a few days, and you start to think nonsense? Although he said so, Roddy's heart was beating fast. In fact, he was really helpless. Now he could not find a way to solve this problem. But how did Sally know? How did she find out that she had a debuff that could not be dispelled? Her Majesty stretched out her hand. It seemed that it was a little difficult for her to lift her arm. Only then did Roddy realize that Sally was weaker than she showed. During the day, he only observed Sally's attribute. But now it seemed that a person's health was full did not mean that her physical condition was good. How stubborn was Sally! When she escaped from a certain death situation, her mind could be said to be tough. Later, he became the famous White Sickle in the Rose Cross Kingdom. Although he was young, His Majesty was completely different from the children of the royal family who had been pampered since young. He was a ruthless character who had been through real battles. Such a person suddenly said that she could not go on. It was often not a joke. You don't know magic, how would you know the knack of this? Sally held his hand as if she wanted to use force, but Roddy felt that she could only gently pinch him. He lowered his eyes and replied softly, If magic can't cure it, there will always be a way to cure it. In this world, magic is not the only thing that can cure diseases, right? I'm afraid it's not that simple. Sally shook her head. I can feel that, when I first activated this artifact scepter, I had a strange connection with it. In the following days, when my strength increased, it would also become stronger. If I became tired, it would stay the same. Chapter 1045. This kind of thing sounded really hard to understand. How could a living person coexist with a piece of wood? However, the power of the gods could not be explained by ordinary magic. Moreover, in this world of magic, there were many similar contracts. In the current situation, the Viper's Kiss was roughly equivalent to a leaking boat. The only thing Sally could do on the boat was to try to slow down the speed of water leakage, but she was unable to repair it. If there was no external help, perhaps the Queen of the Kingdom of Karen would be drowned in front of her eyes. Of course, Roddy would not allow such a thing to happen, but his ability was limited. The only way now was to try his best to find all ways to remedy the situation. We've gone through a lot, this kind of thing will not be a problem. Believe me. Roddy held her hand and promised in a low voice. Sally also knew that her words today were a little pessimistic. She actually wanted to hide it, but she also knew that Roddy and the others probably already knew. At this time, she expressed her worries and felt a lot better. When I was fighting with the Viper Cross, every time I faced a battle, there was a risk of death, but I don't know how I survived. I was not afraid at all. Now that I'm in such a position, I'm more afraid of death than before. Sigh. She sighed softly, as if she felt ashamed of her cowardice. Roddy did not agree and said in a low voice, "People will die. If everyone only lives in fear, what else can they do? The kingdom has just been pacified, and there can't be any more accidents. For the sake of those suffering people, Your Majesty should live a good life." After saying this, Sally was silent for a long time and finally said, "I can't listen to other people say it. But you say it, I'll listen." Roddy was really distressed. He gently hugged the Queen. "There is still time, and there are many ways. I'll find it. You must take good care of your body and wait for me to find a solution, okay?" Sally nodded. She was actually sleepy and could barely keep her eyes open. Roddy carried her to the bed, and after washing up, he took care of the Queen and fell asleep. Looking at her quiet face while she slept, Roddy lay beside her and did not sleep for the whole night. "Lord Saint, today's newspaper seems to be a lot thicker?" Panda asked casually at the dining table. On this floor, there were naturally no servants to bring breakfast to them. Regardless of whether it was the Holy Lord, the priestess, or the mercenary captain, they all had to go to the canteen to get their own food. Therefore, every morning, the guys who were locked up would meet each other. As the Pope of the Moon God clan, Blake maintained his usual manner. After thinking for the first few days, he did not become more modest. Instead, he became more ostentatious. He chanted scriptures, prayed to the moon, and so on. However, the Hersino Magic Tower did not respond to any of these. It was as if they had been forgotten. All they did was eat and sleep. They send out a copy every day. They don't forget to keep us abreast of current events. Blake said in a mocking tone. There was bread, cheese, bacon, and 2 boiled eggs in front of him. There was also a cup of hot milk tea in front of him. Many nobles didn't have this kind of treatment, but it was common in the Magic Tower. However, the Holy Lord had no intention of being a prisoner. He had been looking for a breakthrough. The relationship between humans and dragons was the key to his breakthrough. As the leader of a sect that could summon miracles, all Blake needed was an opportunity. The dragons from a few days ago seemed to have quite a high status. Panda glanced at the front page of the newspaper. The picture on the front page showed a group of dragons leaders. These are the elders of the dragons? I heard that most of them are at least demigod level. The newspaper was a means of propaganda in Roddy's hands. Naturally, it was not used simply to report news. He was very familiar with what news to publish, what news to hide, and how to control the direction of public opinion. He came from the information age and was very familiar with these things. There were many ways to maintain harmony and stability. These guys who had just come into contact with the newspaper would not know about them. As for the topic of how powerful are the elders of the dragons, it had already been explained many times through the popular science questions and answers on the back pages of the newspaper. Now, if one were to casually go to a tavern and ask, basically everyone could describe the strength of the Dragon Clan. In this environment of public opinion, the strength and credibility of the current government of the Kingdom of Karen was much higher than that of Charles II. "It seems to be some new agreement," Blake responded. He had just put the plate of food here, and had not had time to look at it. At this time, he opened the newspaper, and after reading 2 pages, he frowned. "That's not right." The news on the front page was about intellectual property protection. Panda glanced at it. Other countries would definitely not dare to do this, but it's really not a problem for him to do it. The newspaper said that Roddy was about to implement laws related to intellectual property protection from the magic level. After all, the country was big, and it was still a long way to go to control the patent of peddlers and peddlers. But Elson had become an absolute authority on magic, and now it was not difficult to directly promote it. Blake could imagine how much profit there would be. However, it was written that the 5 lords had purchased the patent from the Strategic Arms Research Department, and at the same time, the authorization agreement was also shown. At this point, Blake's heart was a little shocked. Continuing to read, on the 3rd page, the special topic of Advanced Mathematics Lecture at Hersino Magic Tower was just an inconspicuous message on the surface, but there was a long list of dragons attendees, and they were here to listen to the lecture. As a former elder of the Holy Assembly, and now the Pope of the Moon God clan, Blake was much more sensitive to politics than others. Previously, he had judged that the honorary elder was just a consolation prize. Now that such a sudden change had happened, what did it mean? If the honorary elder was so decadent, it meant that the agreement between humans and dragons was far from being as solid as it seemed. Everyone was just looking after each other and putting on a posture of cooperation. But now, with this scene, Blake's heart suddenly beat fast. Could his previous plan still succeed? He ate his breakfast uneasily, and not long after, someone came to inform him that the Prime Minister would be questioned in 10 minutes. He drank a glass of water nervously, got up and followed the magic apprentice upstairs. To go to the top of the building, they had to pass through the area where the dragons were. With Blake's strength, he belonged to the completely non-threatening type. Therefore, when going up the stairs, Holy Lord Blake could clearly see what the dragons were doing on these floors. Chapter 1046. At the end of the war in the Kingdom of Karen, the dragons were exposed to an infection scandal. A large number of dragons were sent to the Hersino Magic Tower for isolation treatment, and Sally, Roddy, and Edith were called the attending physicians responsible for them. After Sally's long-term dispel, the infected dragons could not be said to be completely cured, but more than 90% of them were no longer in danger. However, most of them still stayed here. Rather than saying that they were receiving treatment, it was better to say that they continued to enjoy the convenience of the magic tower. That's right, for the dragons, the Hersino Magic Tower was indeed convenient. What kept the dragons here was not the popular entertainment area. After all, those entertainment activities were the same no matter where they went. The reason was still the points system. Because now, the so-called points were no longer simply the currency used in the tower. After the battle in the Silent Forest where Body transformed into a demon, the 5 major dragons had completely implemented the points punishment system within the clan in order to refresh the atmosphere. The elders in the clan were always troubled by those who were lazy and did not want to make progress. Don't think that all dragons were studious and motivated. Characters like Basta and Aglay could be considered as above average among the dragons. It was enough to show how many trash there were within the dragons. In the past, the major dragons did not think much of these fellows who were dragging them down. After all, the dragons had a low fertility rate, and every member needed to be cherished. Coupled with their natural strength and talent, even the worst dragons still had an overwhelming advantage when facing most of their enemies. This made making do and living become the creed of many dragons. It was said that the dragons were arrogant because they were almost invincible without doing anything. Others might not be able to climb the mountain peak even after several lifetimes, but this group of fellows were born lying on the top of the mountain peak. With such talent, it was not surprising that they had lost their ambition. However, due to the demon crisis, the lords took the opportunity of the alliance between the 5 dragons and humans to promote the points punishment system. All members of the dragons had to earn enough points by publishing academic articles, completing missions, and so on a quarterly basis in order to pass. If they could not meet the requirements within 3 months, they would have to accept the punishment. This rule immediately caused the lazy guys to complain incessantly. Writing papers? Experiment? It sounded simple, but there were plenty of people within the dragons who did not know the rope. As a result, recently, more and more dragons came to Hercino Magic Tower. Some of them wanted to use their connections to plead for leniency, some really wanted to learn how to write papers, and some wanted to see if they could plagiarize 1 or 2 papers to get away with it. But no matter what, the situation of the dragons was completely stirred up. Blake did not know how far the cooperation between the dragons and Roddy had progressed. The recent Age of Cullen did not show that the 2 sides were close. However, as he followed the servant up the 4th floor, the number of dragons that walked past him had reached nearly 30. This number was unimaginable. Although most of the dragons communicated in the dragon language, when they spoke to the apprentices in the magic tower, they used the Bringan language. Blake listened carefully and realized that these dragons were asking about topics such as, the lab is lacking certain materials, where do I go to submit my paper, and so on. Obviously, the dragons that went in and out of the various labs were busy with their research, and it was magic research. Blake's heart sank as he watched. Things did not seem to be as simple as he thought. Along the way to the top floor of the magic tower, Blake did not see any of the various formations that were set up to highlight the rank. There was no shocking number of servants or guards here. The door of the room that Roddy was in was no different from the other places, except for the wooden sign that said Lab 3. The servant knocked on the door, and after asking for permission in a low voice, Blake was allowed to enter. He was a little stunned. He did not expect that the current number 1 person in the kingdom was not in a meeting hall or something like that, but in a lab. Thinking about the dragons downstairs, Blake realized that even if his strength was 100 times stronger, he would not dare to behave atrociously in a magic tower full of dragons. Prime Minister. Blake cleared his throat. When he was about to say something, Roddy, who was writing something on the test bench, interrupted. Let's talk later. There were some instruments on the test bench. Blake looked around, and then he was shocked by Jingle, who was lying in the corner. He could tell that the wood elf was not in a normal state at a glance, but he could not ask since Roddy was here. Go back first, Roddy said to Jingle without looking up, and the latter obediently turned around and crawled back into the demiplane lair. At this time, Roddy had put down the quill in his hand, stood up and said, I don't have much time, so I'll make it short. Blake's scalp was a little tight. He came with the mentality of negotiation today, but it seemed that Roddy did not have such an idea at all, because he did not seem to care about the Holy Assembly at all. According to what your Holy Assembly has done before, it is not a problem for me to catch all of you and kill you. But it is meaningless to kill so many people. Today I will give you 2 choices. You choose. Roddy looked tired because he had not slept all night, thinking about all kinds of problems. Now he was too lazy to look at Blake, and he just rubbed his eyebrows. Holy Lord Blake clenched his fist. Roddy was too arrogant. He did not care about the Holy Assembly at all. But what could he say? Because what Roddy said was true. With the current foundation of the Holy Assembly, where could they hide after being exposed in the kingdom of Karen? Could they, as a group of arcanists, defeat the Crystal Cannon? Blake bit the bullet and said, "Well, Prime Minister, the Holy Assembly has now become the Moon God clan. Although he was captured by the dragons, thinking of the dragons' attitude towards Roddy, Blake still decided to take a risk. He also had a trump card in his hand. According to the principle of negotiation, he was qualified to test the Holy Assembly. But before he could finish his words, Roddy interrupted him. If you want to listen, then listen. If not, I will let you die here today and find someone else to continue." The current leader of the Kingdom of Karen raised his eyes. "Do you understand what I mean?" Blake swallowed hard. It was hard for him to even breathe. His face was flushed. Only then did he realize that Roddy did not want to negotiate at all. But he was not willing to give up. He took a deep breath and said in a low voice, "The Holy Assembly has collected many heritages related to the High Elves in the past 200 years. Before I came here, I have already ordered my men to destroy them if I do not return in 10 days. Faced with Roddy's aggressive questioning, he had no choice but to use all his cards. "Are you threatening me?" Chapter 1047. I dare not threaten you, but I hope to have the right to talk to the Prime Minister on equal terms. As soon as the words left his mouth, Blake had no other way out. At this time, he had no other choice. If he wanted to take the initiative for himself, he had to rely on such fierce words and means. "Didn't you want the information on the High Elves? If you dare to make a move, we will all die together." But as soon as Blake finished speaking, Roddy raised his hand and pointed at the window. "I will now send the dragons to the Moon God clan's location. Before nightfall, I believe that all the so-called information in your mouth will be dug out. There is no need to wait for 10 days. Tomorrow at the latest, I will put those things in front of you and let you die knowing what you are. What do you think?" There was a sudden dead silence in the room. Blake's cold sweat flowed down his cheeks and dripped onto the floor. He wanted to speak a few times, but Roddy's tired and indifferent gaze made him unable to reply. This was not only the fear of death, but also the huge sense of helplessness due to the gap in knowledge. Was Roddy trying to scare him? Blake did not dare to take the risk because the possibility of what Roddy said was too high. He thought about the newspaper he just read. The relationship between the dragons and humans had suddenly become close. How did he get caught and brought here? After all, it was the 5 dragons who personally took action. Since he could send the dragons to catch him, why couldn't he send them to find things? Blake was in a daze for a few seconds before he realized where he was wrong. He had been using the concept of a traditional ruler, like Charles II, to judge Roddy's behavior. Only now did he realize that the Prime Minister in front of him was not that kind of person at all. The most important difference was that the power Roddy currently controlled was on a completely different level compared to the feudal monarchs like Charles II. In the past, Blake would still be proud of the power and glory of the Holy Assembly. But there was no harm without comparison. The Holy Assembly was indeed much stronger than those local nobles. But now, the Kingdom of Karen was completely unified. Its population and economy were equal to the sum of all the previous lord. Moreover, the level of magic had improved by leaps and bounds because of the cooperation with the dragons. With Elson, the magic core city, the number of magic departments under Roddy was not the same as the small magic towers supported by the nobles. Under such circumstances, what advantage did the High Elves of the Holy Assembly have? Just as he was sitting there, someone knocked on the door of the laboratory. A servant came in and reported, "Prime Minister, His Excellency Arlwa of the Frost Dragon race requests an audience." Roddy wanted to wave his hand and refuse, but when he heard that it was Kardashian's brother, he immediately waved his hand and said, "Oh, then invite him in." Seeing Blake standing there with a pale face, he directly waved his hand and said, Whether you are the Moon God clan or the Holy Assembly, the only thing you need to do now is to obey the country. If you don't agree with this, then you can leave. This was basically an ultimatum. You can leave did not really mean that Blake could leave. Combined with what Roddy had said before, if he turned and left now, the consequences would be that he would disappear from the world. Before he could respond, the door behind him opened. The frost dragon Arwa, who had not been seen for a long time, strode in. He was one of Victor's more valued sons. In terms of power, he was probably equivalent to Iskar's position in the Red Dragons. But Arwa should have been patrolling in Lesamon before. Why would he suddenly come here? With doubts in his heart, Roddy stood up and greeted, "Lord Arwa, long time no see." "Don't call me Lord. Now I have to call you Prime Minister." Arwa was still as lively as ever. His attitude towards Roddy was completely different from his father Victor's shrewdness and was as warm as the spring breeze. He greeted him after entering and smiled. "I have to thank you for saving my sister the last time we met. I didn't think I would say the same thing again this time. It's a coincidence." It was not convenient for Roddy to go into details now since Blake was still standing there. Arwa looked at him curiously. "This is an elder of the San Marano Assembly, a descendant of the High Elves." Arwa did not react to Roddy's answer, but he added, "They may not be good at anything else, but they are good at causing trouble. Your sister and I were almost trapped in a dimensional prison." So it's them. Obviously, Alva had heard about the time and space prison. He turned around and glared at Blake. Then, he asked straightforwardly, "What? You're still keeping him? Are you planning to hang him after the new year? Or are you going to drag him out and behead him later?" The Kingdom of Karen had the custom of executing criminals on death row after the new year. The method of execution varied from place to place. Hanging was the most common method, but beheading was also a part of it. Of course, the result was the same. Blake trembled. He did not expect the dragons to ask such a question. His forehead was full of cold sweat. He wanted to speak but did not dare to because of fear. He was afraid that if he said anything wrong, he would be dragged out and beheaded on the spot. To be able to change from Elder of the Sacred Guild to Lord Holy Lord, Blake's mind was definitely stronger than the average person. However, he had no trump card in his hand, the enemy in front of him was terrifying, and there was also a powerful dragon suppressing him from the side. It was already good enough that he could barely maintain the ability to think. There are a lot of people in the Sacred Guild. If we want to deal with them, we have to uproot them. I let him choose. Roddy changed the topic and ignored Blake. "I remember that you should be in Lachman. It's not time for the patrol rotation yet, right? It's all because of this battle. It's like there's an earthquake within the 5 great dragon tribes. That so-called cumulative punishment system isn't just implemented in Karun's territory. Even in Lassiman, I'm thinking about finding a laboratory to write my thesis in. However, my father said that the patrol range has been increased and the rotation period has been shortened. I happen to be transferred here. Now that I have 2 weeks of leave, I came to take a look." "Oh? What about Lachman? Your sister is doing well. I even went to see her before I left." Arwa knew what Roddy was worried about. "I heard that she will stay for another 2 years? I don't think it's necessary. She has almost learned everything she can over there. Next, she can either go for actual combat or come here to be nurtured." Chapter 1048. That's good. I'm relieved. Although Roddy and Arwa had only met a few times, the two of them got along well. Arwa was a straightforward person. He had elements of Kardashian's carelessness, but he was not a careless person who started strong but ended weak. To be able to become one of the best in the Frost Dragon race, his brain was definitely not bad. "I will definitely do what I promised. This is not a big deal. Martak is quite slow, but I can rest assured that he will take over my position, Arlwa said as he sat to the side. He did not even look at Blake. After all, in the eyes of the dragons, there was not much difference between a holy elder and a passerby. In any case, they were just ants that could be crushed to death with a finger. I looked around just now. It's really lively down there. Almost all the famous fellows of the 5 dragons are here. There are also a few old enemies who insisted on competing with me for seasonal points. He shook his head. It's just a pity that Iskar and the others encountered such an accident. I want to go and comfort them, but I don't know if it's appropriate. A servant brought a hot drink. Arlwa took it up and took a sip. Roddy smiled and nodded. They are actually fine now. If you don't believe me, you can ask Lord Victor. Tomorrow, Kardashian will have a lecture. If you are interested, you can go and listen. TSK. I never thought that I would be able to listen to my sister's lecture in this life. Arlwa lowered his voice. She has always been against this kind of thing. When I was in my 60s, my father asked her to demonstrate a spell in front of the other clansmen. But because there were a few enemies in the group, she would rather quarrel with my father than go. This matter was quite fierce. She did not speak to my father for 3 or 4 years. After that, no matter what public speaking, my father never mentioned letting her go on stage again. There's such a thing? Then I have to ask her later. Don't. If you say it, she will definitely know that I said it. Maybe she will come and beat me up. Roddy and Arlwa chatted for a long time, as though no one else was around. Blake swallowed his saliva as he realized that Arlwa's father was the overlord of the Frost Dragon race, Victor. The Lord's children were all on good terms with Roddy. Seeing this, Blake realized that he had made a mistake. Was he trying to incite conflict between the dragons and the human alliance? In this kind of situation, if he said a few more words, he would probably be beaten to death by Arlwa. Could it be that Bast and the others who brought him here were trying to create an illusion for him? A lot of absurd ideas popped up in Blake's mind, but he naturally did not know that those guys who spoke ill of Rhodey in front of him were not only beaten up by Rhodey, but were also dragged back to the territory to be confined for 50 years. Arlwa did not have any urgent matters to attend to. He had just flown over from Lassiman, and casually talked about the situation there. Overall, everything was stable, but he planned to ask Roddy and his sister, Kardashian, out for dinner. I'll be staying in the Magic Tower for the next half a month. I'll mainly be busy with my thesis. After that, I might be on duty in the Eastern Continent, but the magic standards in the kingdoms there are too low. I don't think I'll be able to conduct any experiment. That's great. I'll arrange a laboratory for you anytime. There's a good tavern in the city. Let's go try out the specialties of Hollier City tonight. We'll talk then. All right, I'll go look for them in the research division. Arlwa was very straightforward. He waved his hand and left. When the door closed, Blake, who had been the background for more than 10 minutes, finally snapped out of his daze and took a deep breath. However, he did not even dare to lift his hand to wipe the sweat off his forehead. He knelt on one knee and said in a low voice, "Prime Minister, the Moon God sect is at your command." Roddy returned to his seat and asked with an expressionless face, "Have you thought it through?" Blake was a political animal. He was willing to do anything to achieve his goals. Obviously, he was willing to agree to anything in exchange for a way to survive. As for whether he could keep his position as the Pope of the Moon God clan, he did not dare to test it. He knew that he had no bargaining chips left. He was like a fish on the chopping board. The only thing that could be considered as an advantage was the theurgy that the Moon God clan had displayed. However, these things did not seem to have much to do with him as the Pope. Go back and continue to be the Pope. However, all religious activities must be reported to the cabinet. I will assign 4 people to be the priests. You know what to do. As for the Holy Assembly, What Roddy wanted to do was not to exterminate them. His previous murderous words were more of a warning to the other party. Since Blake was willing to cooperate, then letting him continue to be the Pope was actually the most cost-effective way. Roddy needed the existence of the Moon God clan because the theurgy displayed by Panda had surpassed the performance of the Rose Cross. The Prime Minister hated the Apostles to the extreme. What he wanted to do was to firmly control this sect and treat it as a test subject. In other words, Roddy planned to control the power of the god Styrian of the Moon God clan. It sounded like a boastful statement, but nothing was impossible under the government's orders. The Moon God sect was allowed to spread within a small area, the number of followers was firmly controlled, the key positions were controlled by their own people, and the Pope was a mere figurehead. This way, the Moon God sect wouldn't pose a threat to the kingdom's current rule. Of course, Blake knew what he was facing, but he had no other choice but to admit defeat. So after listening to Roddy's words, he obediently lowered his head and said, "Yes, Prime Minister. Also, in the future, do not occupy the streets or squares for any group activities. If you want to chant, do it at home. I do not want to see the Moon God clan using this or that festival as a gimmick to gather people, understand?" Roddy casually waved his hand and said, "Later, I will ask someone to give you a rule. See for yourself what to do and what not to do." Blake repeatedly agreed. He did not quite understand why Roddy emphasized this point, but the latter did not explain. He just sat there silently and did not speak. The Holy Lord heaved a sigh of relief, knowing that he had passed the test today. But when he quietly asked to leave, Roddy said, "Go back and ask Panda to come up." "Yes, Prime Minister." He pursed his lips and excused himself. Not long after, a bewildered Panda came to the door of the laboratory. Roddy's attitude towards him was much better. He stood up and said, "Priest Panda, there is something I need your help with." "Prime Minister, please tell me." Unlike Blake, Panda was a high priest of the Moon God sect. Even if the sky were to fall, there would be someone to hold it for him. He didn't look worried at all. Roddy was very satisfied with this. He said, "I want you to use divine power to heal someone." This was not a problem at all. Panda readily agreed and then followed the Prime Minister to a room not far away. Chapter 1049. Panda's divine healing lasted for nearly 2 hours, but this time, Moon God Styrian did not respond to him as actively as before. "Do I need to do it when the moon is full, or is it better at night?" Roddy was nervous because no one knew what the result would be when it came to the gods. Panda's performance in the Forest of Silence did not need to be said. To be able to create a divine realm meant that he was indeed Styrian's favorite. In a sense, Panda's position in Styrian's heart was probably higher than Blake's. Roddy could only think of the powerful divine incantation of this priest when it came to treating injuries related to the gods. However, after a few failures, Panda replied, "If the divine spells respond, what you said will indeed have some effect." He shook his head. "The problem now is that the divine spells do not respond, and I don't know why." After Panda finished speaking, he did an experiment on the spot. He changed the target of the divine spells to himself, and after chanting the scripture, there was immediately a flash of light, and the fluctuations were intense. The effect was not weak at all. However, when facing Sally, the same scripture, his divine spells seemed to be muted. Roddy was stunned for a few seconds, and could roughly understand what was going on. The gods responded to their believers selectively. When they sensed the presence of another god on Sally, it was likely that Styrian chose to refuse to respond. Logically speaking, this should be the most likely possibility. "Prime Minister, it's okay. There's a reason for this, I understand." Roddy looked at his nervous face and waved his hand. "Oh yes, the Moon God clan will be regulated in the future, and many rules will need to be changed. As the priest, you'd better be an example." Panda was stunned and immediately understood that Roddy was going to put him in an important position. However, this was a bit strange. It would be normal if the Holy Lord Blake said this, but the Prime Minister naturally had another meaning. He did not hesitate and immediately bowed. "Yes, Prime Minister. An office of the Moon God clan will be opened here in Hollier. When the time comes, you will be given a piece of land. It doesn't matter if you build a church or a shrine, but you will need a person in charge." Roddy said casually, "The center of the Moon God clan will not be located in some remote area. I think you are quite suitable to stay here." The meaning of this sentence was very clear. Pope Blake's position had to be weakened. Not only did he not have much power, but Roddy also had to establish a branch to further limit his influence. Panda was one of the Moon God sect's other pillars of power. Of course, Roddy wouldn't always monitor the Moon God clan with high-pressure method. Sooner or later, there would be problems. Therefore, he had to divide the clan internally, recruit them, and suppress them. This was the long-term solution. At this time, what could Panda say? Blake had just told him dejectedly about Roddy's decision. Now the Moon God clan obviously had no choice in the current situation of the Kingdom of Karen. Although he knew that the Prime Minister wanted to carry out internal checks and balances, it was better than being dragged out and beheaded, right? Therefore, Panda agreed without hesitation. After he left, Roddy frowned and checked Sally's condition. She didn't sleep well last night, and her eye bags were a little swollen. However, she seemed to be in a good mood. At least after Panda left, she still joked with Roddy. However, when it came to her body, her face was still a little gloomy. It seems that it is indeed not easy to solve. It's just that one method proved to be useless. Roddy stood up and said, "I talked to Elder Constant of the Green Dragons this morning. He will come for a checkup in the afternoon. It's getting late. Want to have lunch together?" Sally knew that he was afraid that she would be in a bad mood, so he stayed by her side. Women were emotional creatures after all. She immediately smiled and reached out her hand. "Sure. You haven't been with me for a long time. I was too busy before. Of course, I have to spend more time with you now." Roddy stood up and helped Sally to the dining room. The Queen, who was usually lively, now walked steadily and slowly. He saw it and felt worried. But to cheer her up, Roddy told her about Blake's embarrassing behavior in front of Alva. Sally laughed and covered her mouth. However, when they were about to reach the dining room, her legs became a little weak. She leaned on Roddy to steady herself. "I slept too late. I'm a little dizzy and almost sprained my ankle." She did not think much of it, but Roddy knew that even if the Queen appeared normal, this condition meant that Sally was now weaker than an ordinary person. "The new year is coming. There will be a party in the tower. I'll arrange it well so you don't tire yourself out." The Queen and the Prime Minister naturally did not have to go downstairs to eat in the dining room. There was a dining room in the suite. After the two sat down, the servants quickly pushed lunch on a dining cart. The cooking methods of this world were primitive, but under Roddy's advocacy, the chefs serving the nobles and royals would naturally not cook crudely. There were many half-planes in the magic tower that were as warm as spring, so there were still fresh vegetables on the table even in winter. Cream mushroom soup, potato stew with venison, and crispy thousand-layer pancake. The cost of these things was not high, but ordinary nobles would definitely not be able to eat them. Many of the cooking methods were new dishes that Roddy had casually instructed, and Sally, who was used to rough cooking, was full of praise. The speech is still competent. It's just some formulaic words. Sally ate a piece of venison. The meat cooked in the pressure cooker was extremely tender, and it melted in her mouth. Delicious food would always make people happy. She swung her legs twice happily. "It's just, I'm afraid I can't stay for long for dinner." because her current physical condition was very poor. If she showed fatigue in such a public place, it would be a sign of instability for the entire country. Although the Kingdom of Karen was currently moving in the direction of a constitutional monarchy, there was still a long way to go for ordinary people to accept this concept change. As soon as the king's health was heard, the result of the surging undercurrents was that the cost of maintaining stability would increase for no reason. "I'll arrange it, don't worry." The two talked and laughed as they finished their lunch. After returning to Sally's study, the Green Dragon Elder Constant happened to come over. This powerful Green Dragon Elder had just met with Roddy yesterday. He was very interested in Hook's Law and asked a lot of questions at that time. Therefore, when facing Roddy and Sally, his attitude was very polite. The specific reason should be related to that artifact scepter. Her Majesty's body is fine, but if the scepter cannot be restored, it will be difficult for a human body to sustain for a long time. He gave the same conclusion as Roddy, but as an elder, Constance's reputation was not undeserved. When he came in, he was wearing a robe woven from leaves, but at this time, he took off the necklace he was wearing and handed it to Sally. "It should be able to last for a few months, but if you use it again, the effect will be reduced." Roddy glanced at it and found that it was an epic quality magic necklace. In addition to the various attributes that it increased, the most eye-catching thing was that it increased maximum HP by 10 points per day. Chapter 1050. From his observations over the past few days, Sally's maximum HP would be reduced by 8 to 12 points every day. However, with this necklace called Leaf of Purity, Sally's maximum HP should be guaranteed in the short term. Roddy took a closer look at the description. It showed that the effect lasted for 98 days. In other words, it was enough to keep Sally's maximum HP from dropping too much for 3 months. However, the words, "after the expiration, the effect will be severely reduced after repeated use," also indicated that this was not a long-term solution. It seemed that this thing could not increase the maximum HP indefinitely. Otherwise, wouldn't she become an unkillable monster if she wore it for too long? Therefore, to solve the problem, he probably had to fix the scepter from the root. Otherwise, once the time passed, Sally would still face the situation of waiting for death. Put it on and see the effect. Elder Constant was very confident in his necklace. After Sally thanked him in a low voice, she put it on her neck with Roddy's help. The nourishment of nature magic was invisible. She did not feel any changes at first, but when she stood up, she immediately found that her body seemed to be much lighter. After taking a few steps, Roddy hurried forward to support her. However, Sally waved her hand and paced back and forth in the room. Finally, she jumped on the spot and took a deep breath. "I do feel much better." Roddy's tense heart finally relaxed. He turned to look at Constant and thanked him repeatedly. "It's my pleasure." Constant smiled. Seeing that Roddy wanted to say something, he knew that he did not know what conditions to offer. Constant naturally would not give a precious necklace for free. He whispered, "It's good that I can take some time to go to the research department for an exchange. Those laws and whatnot. I'm quite interested." "No problem." Roddy immediately agreed. If he could make Sally's physical condition better, he would definitely agree to any request. "Honorary elders, it's easy to arrange the time. I'll go and discuss with them. I'll definitely inform the elders if there's any news." It was perfectly normal to use a favor to gain some benefits, and as an elder of the dragons, there was no lack of gold, silver, or other treasures. The only thing he desired was knowledge that he had never come into contact with before. Roddy sighed inexplicably in his heart. The people at the lower levels wanted money and resources, but when it came to the level of the dragon's elder, what they wanted were just a few formulas. He could be considered to have directly experienced the benefits of materializing knowledge. After exchanging a few pleasantries with Constant and discussing the details, he did not forget to whisper, regarding this information about Her Majesty, I hope that the Elder can keep it a secret. Of course. In the name of the Dragon God, I won't tell anyone. Elder Constant understood that Sally's situation was actually very bad. His necklace could only be said to have extended her life for 3 months. Once the time passed, if the root of the problem was not resolved, this Empress would probably not be able to endure for more than a year. With the experience of the Green Dragons, it would be extremely difficult to solve this problem. Roddy also understood in his heart, but now he was able to find a way to delay it, thanks to the current national strength of the Kingdom of Karen and his own status. If he was still the scout from before, would he have the epic-level necklace given by the Elder of the Dragon's Elder to save his life? After exchanging a few pleasantries, Elder Constant took his leave. Roddy and Sally got up to send him off. After the door closed, both of them were silent for a few seconds. Do you really feel better? Roddy took a deep breath and came to Sally to carefully examine her several times. The latter deliberately turned in a circle and replied with a smile, I didn't expect it to really work. This is different from divine arts. I can even smell the fragrance that only exists in the forest. She took a deep breath and couldn't help but lean into Roddy's arms. It feels so much better not to think about death. Well, even if it's just to delay it for a few months. After all, Sally was still young. Although she appeared calm before, the fear of death was far from dispelled by a few jokes. Now that they had found a way to delay it, both of them were a little relieved. But Roddy felt more urgent. 3 months, at most, could be delayed to a year. If there was no other way, he secretly clenched his fists. This necklace was probably the only treatment method that could work for non-god level. It was unrealistic to find a similar method. Even the demigod Elder could not cure it. Should he find those unreliable witch doctors in the kingdom? Sally didn't think so much. She was immersed in the excitement of her body regaining vitality. However, after this excitement, she soon felt sleepy. This made her realize that she could not return to her previous state. Holding the viper's kiss that did not respond, she rubbed her eyes. Yawn. I'm afraid I have to sleep for a while. Seeing this, Roddy felt distressed, but he did not dare to say much. He chatted with her as usual, helped her change into her pajamas, and did not leave until Sally lay in bed at ease. Her Majesty quickly fell asleep, and he returned to his laboratory. He stared blankly at the pile of words that came to him to organize his thoughts. The kingdom was now running smoothly. He had already made the specific plan, and all that was left was to make constant adjustments. The general decisions were basically settled. Now that the border was stable, the Tasman Kingdom was still consuming resources, and the Eastern Kingdom seemed to be unable to cause any trouble because of the natural geographical barrier. There were craftsmen from the Eastern Kingdom in the Viper Cross team. After reading the interrogation report, Roddy learned that on the other side of the mountain range, the situation of those countries was far more complicated than that of the Kingdom of Karen. Speaking of which, this was similar to the situation of countless small countries in the Middle Ages in Europe. They married and fought with each other, but there was no strong country to conquer and annex them. When he was a player, the Eastern Kingdom had never been open because the geographical barrier was difficult for players to cross. Occasionally there was news, but no one paid attention to it. Now that he looked at the neighboring countries, Roddy had to consider, should he open a road to connect them? He was not a belligerent, and he knew that war was only one of the political means, and a relatively low-level one at that. It was not necessary to use it, because the risk was too high, and the loss and return could not be summed up by the word balance. Although they had won the war, the dead soldiers and civilians would not be resurrected, and the vitality of the kingdom would be greatly damaged. Even the agricultural tax, the main source of the country's revenue, would be reduced by more than 40%. If Roddy had not transmigrated, he was afraid that he would have to develop wretchedly for the next 10 years. In the next 5 years, war would be avoided as much as possible, but it did not mean that the wars of other countries would stop. Roddy unfolded the map and looked around the kingdom of Karen, thinking about the names of the places for a long time. Chapter 1051. Of course, Arwa did not know how close Kardashian and Roddy were. He just felt that the atmosphere here was more casual than the canteen full of dragons in the magic tower. After all, he was surrounded by humans, so he could ignore them. The three of them were in a separate cubicle on the second floor. They could hear the chatter in the hall downstairs. The taverns in Hullier were also divided into different classes. This was not a street tavern where good and bad people mixed together. The Prime Minister was out, and the others who ate here did not know who was in the cubicle upstairs, but they had all been investigated by the Intelligence Bureau before they came in. The venison was roasted over charcoal, and the aroma filled the air. Arwa cut a piece with a knife and sighed. It's really boring in Lassyman. There's nothing to do all day. Since the crisis with the ancient behemoths, everything has returned to peace. The troublesome things in the academies are quite normal. I occasionally check the news, but there's nothing unusual in the past 2 years. I thought the tour would be complicated, but it sounds like it's quite relaxing? Roddy picked up his glass and took a sip. The table was square. Kardashian and her brother Arwa sat on one side. This was because she did not publicly announce her relationship with Roddy, so it was not convenient for her to sit with him. Many things in the dragons are actually very relaxing. Kardashian brushed sauce on the roasted mushrooms in front of her and laughed. In fact, it's because there's no supervision. Think about it, how many dragons are there in total? Everyone can only rely on themselves if they follow the rules for this kind of mission. Why do I feel like you're mocking me? Arwa rolled his eyes. To be honest, there's really nothing unusual. I've been patrolling the coastline regularly according to my father's request. Oh yes, I've also found some mutated murlocs, but they didn't cause any trouble. The Lassyman Parliament dealt with them themselves. The influence of the demonic plane will not disappear completely. I have a feeling that their interference and influence on this world will only get worse. Roddy ate a piece of meat. The fat layer of the venison had been roasted until it was crispy, making a crunching sound as he ate it. He raised his hand to brush a layer of honey on the leg meat in front of him and continued, "Of course, let's not talk about these things today. By the way, how is Naife doing over there?" Arwa had mentioned it casually during the day, but what Roddy wanted to know was, of course, not just a few words of information. In fact, Roddy also wanted to ask about Marinthra's situation. After all, the frequency of messages from the fleet was too low, and the amount of information was too little. Unlike Naife, Marinthra didn't like to talk about her daily life, so Roddy really wanted to hear about Arwa's observations. But Kardashian was sitting beside him, so he couldn't ask this question directly. He could only wait and see if Arwa could understand. "I've visited her 3 times and chatted with her dean." Arwa said whatever he had to say. "But you also know that those people are more afraid of my identity, so all they say are conventional words. And the 3rd time was 3 months ago. She happened to pass by the dean's office, so I called her over to ask her a few questions. What do you think? She's not slacking off, is she?" "Slacking off? If you ask me, she should be slacking off. Geniuses learn the most things in the least amount of time. Then, she can think of new tricks." Arwa had always had a high opinion of Naife. Before Roddy left Lassyman, he had talked about Naife with him, and the dragons had said something similar. Now, he was even more generous with his compliments. There are many competitions and competitions in that academy every year. She won 1st place last year, and if everything goes well, she will be the champion this year. Arwa gestured at his neck. Also, she has grown a lot taller. She can even reach my height. Hearing this, Roddy couldn't help but smile. When he saw her again, she would probably be the same as when he first met her in Mora Village in the game. That's good, that's good. He nodded and felt relieved. By the way, I met another mage who stayed with her. I can't remember her name, but she greeted me. I'm quite curious because the other mages in Rasman don't act so naturally in front of me. Arwa took the initiative and said, "That's right, I met another mage who stayed with her." Roddy blinked and waited for him to continue. "But I didn't talk much with her. I just asked her about her daily life and if she needed any help. She said everything was fine, so I left." Arwa didn't have a deep impression of Merlin Sarah. He only thought of this weak mage as a study companion for Roddy. Little did he know that Roddy let out a sigh of relief after hearing his words. He smiled and said, "It's good that the situation there is stable. Yes, the academy in Lassiman is well protected. Even if there is a fight outside, it will still look like an independent world inside," Arwa replied. Alva replied, then suddenly said, "Oh right, the countries around Lassiman have been in a mess for the past 2 years. It should be those Tuck women who are behind it. Their parliament seems to be discussing whether or not they should use force." As a patrolling dragons, it was easy for him to obtain such information. But Arwa didn't think much of it. In the eyes of the dragons, human wars were similar to soccer matches. It didn't matter how they fought. But Roddy had just heard of such a big thing. Obviously, Lassiman did not disclose this information to him. After recalling the letters from Naife and Merlin Sarah, Roddy remembered that they had casually mentioned the Parliament is always arguing, and the Dean hasn't been back to the Academy recently. At that time, he only thought of this as a daily complaint. He didn't know that this was the deeper reason behind it. Just as Arwa said, the life in the Academy was relatively closed off. It was normal for the mages who were focused on their studies to not pay attention to the outside world. But to the Prime Minister, this information was very valuable. He didn't speak for a long time. He stared at the roasted venison in front of him and only reacted when the honey on the brush dripped into the charcoal fire. Arwa was amused. Kardashian leaned on her chair and said, "He's always like this. I guess he's thinking of something crooked again. TSK, as the Prime Minister, there are too many things to think about. Sometimes, he would be in a daze for a long time just to drink water." Hearing his sister's words, Arwa finally laughed. "Ha, I can't think of so many things. I can study magic, but the war in the human world is too complicated. It's completely different from the dragons. There are too many things to consider. Just thinking about it gives me a headache." "I'm sorry, I did think of some problems." Roddy cut the crispy venison for them. "The Tuck women are not easy to deal with. But to me, the more they fight, the better." "Oh? They are so far away. Can their war affect the kingdom of Karen?" Chapter 1053. Arms. Arwa was curious about the term, but he quickly understood. Is this the rumored weapon used in the war to unify the world? He had not heard any news about the war in the kingdom of Karen from Lassman. He had only heard a few words from his friends, but he did not know much about it. Yes, the way of war is changing. With advanced weapons, these things are very profitable. Roddy did not shy away from this. After all, Arwa was Kardashian's younger brother. In other words, he had to call him brother-in-law. Of course, he did not dare to do so casually. "I heard that Lord Quio was almost injured by a bomb? Are they joking?" Arwa did not know much about crystal energy, but Kardashian made it clear to him. With the ability of a lord, it is very difficult to defend against an explosion. But when he was ambushed, Lord Quio was almost injured by accident. This was equivalent to confirming the power of the crystal bomb. Arwa was a little stunned. "Prime Minister, You can make something like this? I didn't make it. The maker is sitting next to you. Roddy smiled. The title of honorary elder is not given for nothing. The lords are going to listen to her lecture tomorrow. Wow, I haven't seen you for a few years. Sister, you have become so powerful? Kardashian couldn't help but chuckle at Alva's astonishment. Roddy continued to brush sauce on the barbecue, but he was relieved. Obviously, this powerful frost dragon race had a good relationship with Kardashian. He was not a half-baked idiot like Basta, but the future flag-bearer of the frost dragon race. The deeper reason why he asked Arwa out for dinner today was to express goodwill to his brother-in-law and build a good relationship with him. He wanted to make sure that Arwa would stand on his side. The dragons had a good relationship with humans, but it did not mean that there were only 5 shitstirrers like Basta. At any time, it was not out of the question to win over one side or suppress another. It was especially important for Roddy to have the support of a future star. Of course, Kardashian would cooperate with Roddy. She drank the wine in her glass and briefly told him how the honorary elder was not valued and how she was provoked by Basta. When Arwa heard that, he immediately became angry and scolded. I knew that guy was up to no good. When father told me to let him date you, I couldn't stand it, but I couldn't stand out and object. Now there is no need to object. That guy has gone back to the dragon domain. She smiled and told him about how Rhodey had defeated Basta and established a position for herself, Iskar, and the others. This time, the way Alva looked at Rhodey changed. He was silent for a long time before he said, "Just now, Prime Minister. If you need my help in the future, just tell me." Arwa's way of doing things was more direct. He would be good to whoever was good to his sister. Roddy saved Kardashian during the Devil's Gate incident. He was grateful to Roddy. Now that he heard this, he knew that Roddy not only saved his sister's life, but also ensured her position among the dragons after she lost the dragon crystal. Let's not talk about it. Prime Minister, let me toast you. He picked up the glass and drank it. Roddy naturally had to drink to show his respect. After 3 rounds of drinking, Arwa, as a dragon's, was naturally not drunk. However, Kardashian, who was in a good mood, was blushing. Without the dragon crystal, her body was stronger than ordinary people, but her alcohol tolerance was not as good as before. She was drunk now, and her eyes were a little unfocused. She leaned against the back of the chair. When Roddy and Arwa were talking about Lassiman and Isika, she suddenly asked, "By the way, speaking of Isika's tuck women, I remember that you brought back 2 of them from Lassiman?" "Yes, they are now working in the research department. I'll have to ask them about the possible war between Lassiman and the tuck race." Rhodey's mind was occupied with the problem of how to sell the firearms at a high price. He was completely unaware of Kardashian's main point. "Hey, I remember that they are 2 beauties with great figures." Kardashian glanced at Roddy. "Ask them? You have to remember to get down to business. Don't cause any trouble." She was obviously drunk. Usually, Kardashian would only talk about women in private. It was not that she was not jealous, but she knew when to show this side of her. However, she was in a good mood today. In addition, she subconsciously did not treat her brother as an outsider. As they chatted, she could not hold back anymore. Roddy suddenly felt something was wrong. He smiled bitterly and said, "Of course it's business. I'm not going to talk about other things." Of course, he would not tell her about Evelyn and Doris seducing him. Although he resisted the temptation, which was a plus, he was not stupid enough to say that other women had taken off their clothes to seduce him in front of his first wife. "Humph, it's good that you know." Kardashian had a proud look. Her cheeks were red, and she looked lazy but beautiful. However, Roddy was already used to her attitude, but Arwa, who was beside him, raised his eyebrows. "Sister, you and Prime Minister Roddy." He thought for a while and asked hesitantly. Roddy's scalp was a little tight. Just as he was about to speak, Kardashian said casually, "Father said that he would observe us for 3 years. He actually agreed, but it was not good for him to let go, right?" Arwa opened his mouth and looked at his drunk sister for a few seconds without saying anything. Roddy had no choice at this time. He could only cough and explain, "I and Kardashian have experienced a lot of battles and then wait, I can't react." Arwa picked up the freshly poured ale and gulped it down. This action made Kardashian laugh at the side. She simply got up and sat next to Roddy. She leaned on his shoulder lazily. "I remember when you were young, you said that you would let me live better than Anruigi in the future. Now, I can say with certainty that you don't have to worry about this problem." The Anruigi she mentioned was an elder of the same generation as her father, Lord Victor. He was talented and had the hope to compete for the position of an elder. But later, because he did not get along with his spouse, the conflict intensified and finally led to the decline of his strength. Now, he had become a marginal second-rate. In other words, he was a typical, tragic character in the Dragons. Arwa was taken care of by his sister since he was young. When he was still a child, he was determined to prevent his sister from such an ending. Now that he heard her mention it, his originally tense expression finally relaxed slowly. Obviously, he also knew that no matter how much he cared for his sister, he had no right to directly interfere with her life or even her future choices. Chapter 1054. Hearing this, Roddy was relieved. He smiled bitterly. He could understand his brother-in-law's cautious state of mind for his sister's lifelong happiness. He said, "Promises are not made with words. It depends on actions. I don't have the skill of sweet talk. Besides, it's not realistic to lie to her. Your sister's temper. Hey, I'm still here. You're already talking bad about me?" Kardashian smiled and pinched his face. It was a very casual action. Roddy looked helpless when he was pinched. Of course, Arwa could see that the two of them had a tacit understanding of each other. As far as he could remember, his sister had never been so relaxed with the opposite sex before. Not to mention pinching his face, she would even frown when someone like Basta got too close to her. "You're right. To be honest, I used to think that no one could stand her." After Arwa finished, Kardashian kicked him under the table angrily. "Wow. So, in your eyes, my temper is so bad?" This was the sister he knew. Arwa, who was kicked, laughed out loud. He casually told Roddy about his sister's performance in the past when she was pursued by a bunch of lascivious men. In short, she was like a block of iron, and most of them were mocked by Kardashian. Roddy had a new understanding of Kardashian. After all, even the dragons were young and frivolous. In contrast, after returning from the prison of time and space, she was much more mature. The meal was almost over. Arwa thought that they were just chatting, but he did not expect that his sister's love life had been settled. Although the human identity of brother-in-law was a little sensitive, considering her current state and Roddy's behavior over the years, it was not difficult for her to accept it. After all, the name Roddy had become a household name in the dragon race for the past few years. Basically, Arwa had regarded him as the most outstanding representative of the human race. If the two of them had never met before, it would not have been so easy to talk to Roddy. When they got up to leave, Kardashian staggered and Roddy naturally hugged her. Arwa looked at his sister's drunken but timid appearance, and his heart was filled with emotion. He left the tavern and returned to the magic tower by horse carriage. Inside the well-sealed carriage, Arwa looked at Kardashian, who had calmed down due to dizziness. He turned to Roddy and said, "I'll apply for a cruise with my father tomorrow. If it's possible, it'll be near the kingdom of Karen or the glacial plain in the north. If there's anything you need help with, feel free to call me. I'll come over to help." This was a deeper statement, because in terms of relationship, Roddy had jumped from friend to family level. Even for dragons who didn't care much about family, this meant another type of relationship that needed to be reevaluated. If that's the case, it would be the best. Roddy knew that he had been recognized, so his tone was no longer as polite as before. He nodded and agreed. Arwa showed his goodwill, and Roddy did not forget to return the favor. He said, "If it's possible, I'll help you arrange a place for the honorary elders' lectures for the next few days. Listen to the new things they talk about. I think it should be useful in improving your strength." Arwa didn't understand the knack of this, but thinking that many dragons were talking about this lecture, he agreed. He didn't take it too seriously. After all, his sister and Iskar were of the same generation, and he knew what they were capable of. But since Roddy had spoken, he naturally wouldn't reject the Prime Minister's request. The carriage soon returned to the Magic Tower. This brother-in-law sent Roddy and Kardashian all the way to the top of the Magic Tower before returning to his room. This behavior made Roddy believe that Arwa's dragon quality was unquestionable. Compared to a guy like Basta who talked big, it wasn't a coincidence that Arwa could become one of the best of the younger generation in the Frost Dragon race. Kardashian was tipsy, but she didn't speak anymore. Roddy helped her upstairs to rest. The latter laid on the bed like an obedient child and said in a low voice, "Arwa actually doesn't have a good relationship with Father. He doesn't agree with many of Father's methods, but because of his excellence, he was able to get to where he is today." Roddy didn't expect that there was such a layer of relationship behind it. He immediately realized that Arwa's application to change the scope of the tour actually required him to talk to his father personally. It was obvious that Arwa was a firm supporter of Kardashian. And for Roddy, this was equivalent to having a powerful inside support in the dragons. Therefore, he must maintain this relationship well in the future. He didn't expect to gain a hardcore ally of the dragons just by having dinner. He replied in a low voice, "I know what to do, don't worry." Glancing at the clock, Roddy covered her with the blanket. "There's still a lecture tomorrow, rest early. These few days are very important." "Understood. You don't forget to accompany Sally." Kardashian held his hand. She was a little drunk and couldn't even lift her eyes. After saying a few words in a daze, Roddy waited until she fell asleep before he pushed the door open and left. In the next 2 weeks, the Honorary Elders lecture went on as scheduled. At first, there were only 10 elders and feudal lords who came to listen to the lecture. But soon, an invisible storm quickly swept through the upper echelons of the dragons. Iskar's second lecture had to be moved to a bigger lecture hall because the number of people had increased to 30. By the third round, all the demigods of the 5 dragons were present. There were almost 60 of them, including some old guys who had been in hibernation for many years. The number of people who came this time was even more than the time when they dealt with the demon body. The series of lectures by Kardashian and the others were not open to the public. At first, Arwa only wanted to give face and deal with it, but now he finally understood how valuable his seat was. Because other than the few people on the podium, he was the only one of the younger generation in the audience. For example, this was like the world's most cutting-edge physics report. There were no more than 100 people qualified to sit in the lecture hall. And in the middle of the 50 or 60 years old high-end scholars, there was a 20-year-old young man. It was hard for him not to be eye-catching. Not to mention how much Arwa could ultimately gain from the lecture, just the fact that he could attend such an occasion could be counted as a kind of capital. After staying in front of all the upper echelons of the 5 dragons for 2 weeks, Arwa not only listened to the new knowledge taught by the honorary elder on the podium, but also participated in the discussion with the demigod masters. The thoughts and ideas revealed by the top masters in a few words were very beneficial to Arwa. It could be said that listening to the words of a wise man is better than reading for 10 years. After half a month of lectures, the new year was coming. Roddy simply took the opportunity to discuss with these demigod masters and added a public lecture on kinetic energy theorem, with on-site experiments. The time was set for the first day of the new year. In other words, these dragons would spend the new year together in Hersino Magic Tower. Chapter 1055. As the snow fell, the New Year's Carnival in Hollier became a historic day for the Kingdom of Karen. Roddy was good at creating momentum, so the gathering of demigod-level dragons was publicized in the newspapers as another important summit of the Human-Dragons Alliance. Although in fact, they were only there to listen to Kardashian and the others' lectures, Roddy did have a few impromptu meetings with the lords. The photos in the newspapers were also taken during the meetings, so it was not a lie. The most direct impact of this kind of news was the stability of the people and deterrence of the surrounding areas. The kingdom had begun to gradually recover from the impact of the war. Roddy was well aware of the impact of public opinion on the people of the country. Now he had set up a propaganda department to supervise all newspapers and magazines in the kingdom. Now the Kingdom of Karen was in the stage of recovery and transformation. The so-called transformation was mainly the updating of farming technology and the gradual popularization of crystal energy. Both of these could essentially free up a large amount of labor and boost productivity. And when a large number of people no longer had to worry about their livelihood, the Industrial Revolution would naturally appear. This process was known to Roddy as an Earthling, but at this time, the other people participating in the New Year's Carnival were unaware. And he was thinking more about how to solve the current problem. The seemingly unified and beautiful country actually still faced various challenges. Looking at the singing and dancing, frolicking dragons and people in the demiplane in front of him, he finally made a decision in his heart, holding the wine glass in his hand, and strode to where Sodeler and Erwin were. Erwin, although alcohol is not allowed in the military camp, would anyone stop you from drinking during the holidays? Why do you look like you've never drunk in your life? Erwin, the military representative, was drinking from an extra-large oak wine glass. Beside him, Sodeler teased him a little, and the latter chuckled and replied, "Isn't it because the Prime Minister's wine is good? The wine in the taverns in town is simply swill compared to here." Sodeler was dressed in a well-ironed military uniform. Today was a formal occasion, so naturally, he would not wear armor. His ancestors were nobles, so he was naturally familiar with such events. Now that he had been in charge of the army for a long time, he naturally had the authority of a general. Roddy walked over and greeted them. "Drink as much as you want. But I don't care if you lie down after drinking." Erwin was Roddy's bodyguard at the very beginning. He served as the commander of the special forces during the war, and after several battles, he also served as an instructor. Now, not only was he skilled in martial arts, but his understanding and application of special operations was probably the benchmark of all the armies on the continent. Sodeler, on the other hand, had a lot of free time after the war. After all, for these elite soldiers, the task of unifying the remaining territories of the kingdom was not difficult at all. The only troublesome thing was the reconstruction of order after the war and the arrangement of demobilization of the soldiers. Fortunately, Roddy had not mobilized hundreds of thousands of soldiers in a single battle. The strength of a war with firearms and explosives was not measured by the number of soldiers. He had already proven this point with this unification battle. Now that the infantry divisions had been assigned to the various military regions, the rule of a biennial rotation was also set. In addition, the work arrangements for the retired veterans were gradually improved. Now, being a soldier in the Kingdom of Karen could be said to be a glorious career, far more than the reputation and treatment of the former private soldiers of the nobles. Because the kingdom did not allow other nobles to have an army, the other nobles were now completely cut off from recruiting soldiers. In terms of power, today's military bigwigs like Sodeler were the ones with the absolute, real power. Of course, he knew where his power came from, so although he spoke casually in front of Roddy, he was not the least bit lacking in etiquette. Prime Minister, this guy drinks like water. I think it's a waste to let him drink so much for nothing. It's rare to get together once a year. I can still afford it. Drink as much as you want, Roddy said with a smile, then clinked glasses with Sodeler and Irwin. The latter saw that Roddy had something to say to Sodeler, so he made an excuse to leave. It's not easy to have this day. How have you been for the past 6 months? Your swordsmanship hasn't deteriorated, has it? He asked casually. The two of them were comrades who had fought together since they were scouts. Back then, when they were galloping on the plains and killing orcs, neither of them expected to stand here and drink today, so there was a lot of emotion in their words. I don't have as much time to practice as I used to. There are a lot of things to deal with every day, Sodeler said truthfully. But after the military's system was perfected, it's much less troublesome than before when it was completely ruled by men. Compared to the nobles before, it's not just a little bit easier for me. So now I can still make time to practice my swordsmanship. As for my level, I don't think I've fallen behind. He spoke modestly, but in fact, Roddy could see that Sodeler had already advanced to level 47. This kind of strength had far surpassed the two Grand Knights Titus and Wellington of EFTA. There was indeed a reason for this. In the past, practice swords had to be carefully maintained and polished, and he would be distressed if one was broken. Now, not to mention weapons and armor, it was not difficult to invite top swordsmen to spar with him. So for this genius, it was normal for his swordsmanship to improve day by day. It's good that you haven't fallen behind, Roddy responded. Sodeler was sharp and immediately heard the implication. Hey, Prime Minister, do you have any new plans? I have some ideas, but I haven't confirmed them yet. But I'm relieved to see that General Sodeler isn't sleeping in the land of gentleness. Roddy looked at the scene of dragons and humans laughing and celebrating in the demiplane and said in a low voice, "The army can't just practice. If they don't come into contact with actual combat for 3 to 5 years, I'm afraid their combat power will be greatly reduced." Sodeler nodded in agreement. Both of them came from the military, so of course they knew the knack. But fighting a war really burned money, and sometimes it was really difficult to balance. If they didn't fight, the army would inevitably be lax. If they fought, the country's finances would be tight. I know what you're worried about, but I'm thinking of another way. Roddy smiled and said no more. After the holidays, make those new soldiers nervous. Don't think that they can lie on haystacks every day and eat their pay just because the war is over. Yes, Prime Minister, he replied, standing at attention. Seeing Roddy wave his hand for him to relax, he smiled and said, "Hey, it reminds me of the old days. Back then, I was also a guy lying down waiting for the army's pay." Chapter 1057. On February 17th, I set off from Beijing. I brought my wife and my dog with me. I stayed in Wuhan and Guilin for a few days. Then, I went to Beihai and went to the southern tip of Weizhou Island. Now, I drove to Panyu, Guangzhou. The next stop was Xiamen. After that, I went back to Suang, Shanghai, Nanjing. After that, I should go to Chongqing and Chengdu. Then, I went down to Yunnan. From Lijiang, I went directly to Linji in Tibet. After that, I went to Lhasa. After leaving Lhasa, I went to Qinghai. After that, I went to Xinjiang. After returning from Xinjiang, I went to Yinchuan. After that, I went from Inner Mongolia to Hohhot and Zhangjiago. Finally, I went back to Beijing. Other than the 3 eastern provinces and a few cities in the central region, I basically went to more than half of China on this trip. It sounded very cool, but I actually had this idea last year. It just so happened that I got a new car at the end of the year. This time, I went to Beihai with my wife to visit my in-laws. Since I had already traveled 2,400 kilometers, I might as well travel around the country by myself. While I was still young, there were still a lot of places I could go. I didn't want to wait until I had time/money/mood to go. Traveling thousands of miles was good for writing and even for life. Therefore, this vacation might be very long. I estimated that it would take another 2 or 3 months. Because this trip is a journey, not a tour. I'm not going to rush to the scenic spots to take photos of tourists who will leave after visiting the place. I want to get in touch with the wider world and see more sceneries. This is what I want to do. I brought an iPad and keyboard with me on the road. However, the current update should be for another book. I didn't have the energy to update 2 books at the same time. It was normal to be tired from the trip. However, when I arrived at a place that was suitable for me to stay for a few more days, I would take some time to write some updates. For example, Shuang or Lijiang. Chapter 1058. I've been away for about 4 months. Except for Hainan, Hong Kong, Macau, Guizhou, the 3 northeastern provinces, and Xinjiang, I've visited all the other provinces and cities. I've driven 19,000 kilometers on this journey, and I've visited all the rivers and mountains of the motherland. From Weizhou Island in the south of Guangxi all the way to the Tanggula Mountains in Tibet, I've walked all the way from 0 to 5,100 meters above sea level. It's tiring, but it's worth it. I guess a lot of people think that I'm a eunuch. In fact, I've stopped updating many times, and the time span is very long, but I've never been a eunuch. Thank you for your continued support. If you're interested in reading my travel notes, I'll update them on Weibo. Just search for my author's ID. Chapter 1060. It was snowing heavily outside the Magic Tower. On the floor of the Magic Tower where the New Year's banquet was held, there was a huge crystal wall surrounding it. The participants who were drinking and standing here could see the scenery outside the tower through the crystal wall. Even though it was already dark, the surrounding buildings were lit up by the magic circle. This kind of night lighting was specially arranged by Roddy. It did not cost much, but the effect was quite amazing for those who had never seen it before. Compared to the royal city or other big southern cities, Hollier was not prosperous. However, under the illumination of the night, the outline of the buildings in the city was clearly discernible. The overlapping lines were dense, and it looked especially spectacular from a high place. Many dragons were praising it. Of course, they only felt that it was novel. Roddy found Sally, who was standing in front of the largest crystal wall with a glass of wine in his hand. She was dressed in a splendid outfit with a crown on her head. The ornamental gemstones were dazzling, and her slightly pale face showed a bit of coldness. When he looked at her from the side, Roddy was also a little dazed. The girl who rode on the horse years ago was now standing at the top of the kingdom. "Are you feeling okay?" He walked to the side and asked in a low voice. This kind of thing was said almost every time they met, but Sally was not tired of it. She smiled and said, "It's a pity that I can't drink, but this juice tastes good." In order to ensure her health, Roddy did not dare to let Sally touch alcoholic drink. Glancing at the dragons who were talking to each other, Roddy whispered, "It's almost time. Say a few words later. Don't force yourself." "Don't worry." Sally held his hand. Roddy felt that her fingers were a little cold. He was worried, but he did not dare to show it on his face. Turning his head, he gestured to the podium in the center of the hall. Soon, the newspaper reporters and cameramen who had been waiting for a long time came to the side carefully. At the same time, the central podium's amplifying magic circle was also activated. The Dragon's Lord and the elders knew that it was time for the New Year's speech, so they all came forward. The members of the cabinet of the Kingdom of Karen and the ministers also stood in line. Apart from them, Sodeler and a series of military representatives stood on the other side, their military postures full of youthful vigor. Sally had seen many big scenes. At this time, she calmly walked to the podium. Roddy followed beside her. Everyone in the front, including the dragons, consciously made way for them. The cameraman in charge of filming seized this moment and desperately recorded the scene in front of him. With her head held high and chest out, Sally stepped onto the podium. Looking at the distinguished figures in front of her, she took a deep breath and began her New Year's speech calmly. In fact, Charles II had made such a speech in the past, but his New Year's banquet was only attended by the nobles of the kingdom. His purpose was only to consolidate his power and beat down the nobles who were not very obedient. As for Sally's speech, even though most of it was just for show of courtesy, there were many phrases that were worth pondering over. For example, she mentioned that the kingdom of Karen is still facing a lot of challenges, we should set a new goal, and so on. Although she did not specify what it was, the elders of the Dragon's Lord understood the meaning behind it. Sally did not speak much. After 5 minutes, she bowed to indicate that her speech was over. Such a short and concise speech was unexpected. After all, this was the first New Year's Day after the unification of the Kingdom of Karen. The nobles in the cabinet thought that tonight's banquet would last until midnight. They did not expect that the highlight would end so soon. They turned their eyes to Roddy. Did the Prime Minister have to make all the important speeches? Roddy helped Sally down the podium and stepped forward. Then he said in a relaxed manner, "Next, I'll have to trouble the lords and elders. Let's take a few pictures together." Lord Victor was the first to step forward. The other lords did not hesitate. Now, the cooperation between the dragons and humans was necessary. It could even be said that Roddy had single-handedly put the forces of the Kingdom of Karen on an equal footing in the cooperation. Therefore, no one dared to hold back. Everyone stood according to their seniority and let the young newspaper staff take pictures. After more than 10 minutes, Roddy waved his hand and said, "Thank you for your cooperation. Please enjoy tonight. Happy New Year." The band played a cheerful song in the room. Sodeler was patted on the shoulder by Roddy. He had no choice but to pull Nora, who was also dressed splendidly, into the hall. The two of them had rehearsed this long ago. At this moment they danced naturally. With him taking the lead, the surrounding nobles and even the young dragons also followed suit. As for the dragon lords and elders, they all walked towards Roddy's position at the same time. "Prime Minister, do you have any difficulties recently? If we can help, the Frost Dragon race will not refuse." Earlier, Victor still treated Roddy as a junior and spoke casually. However, after Kardashian's lecture as the honorary elder, everyone knew who provided the systematic knowledge. Therefore, the few elders who came over all talked to Roddy as an equal. Black Dragon Hurlo's lord, Pucasto, was even more enthusiastic. "I see that the Kingdom of Karen's smelting level is improving rapidly. Can the copper, iron, and silver mines keep up with the supply? Do you need my help to find a few big mines?" This was not just a casual remark. If they wanted to carry out industrial development, the Kingdom of Karen's current level of mineral resources was far from enough. This was especially true for industries like railway construction and military smelting. The demand for ores was increasing day by day. Pucasto's words seemed casual, but in fact it was the key point. Roddy held his wine glass and smiled. "This is indeed necessary. The northern region is rich in mineral resources. When the time comes, I will have to trouble my lord to send a junior to give me some pointers so that I can plan the railway route." Hearing that Roddy had agreed, Pucasto laughed loudly. He was obviously in a good mood. At this time, no one brought up the matter of changing conditions. This was because they knew very well that Roddy had never been greedy for small gains. As long as his allies were good, his rewards would definitely be generous. Seeing that Pucasto had the upper hand, Victor kept his composure and changed the topic. If the few cities do not have enough energy, I can also provide a lot of substitutes like the water essence. Roddy did not decline and agreed with a smile. He turned his head and saw that the green dragon, red dragon, and crystal dragon lord were about to speak, but he spoke first. Actually, I have something to discuss with the lords. Seeing that they all looked over, Roddy did not keep them in suspense. I want to introduce paper money to replace the gold standard currency. However, there has not been an ideal result in terms of durability and anti-counterfeiting of paper money. Because this matter is of great importance, I want to work with the 5 major dragons to develop a reliable, durable anti-counterfeiting currency. At the same time, I want to control the cost. What do you think? Hearing this, the lords agreed without hesitation. In their opinion, the concept of paper money was nothing more than a substitute for currency. Even the astute crystal dragon Krupus could not see why Roddy was putting in so much effort to do this. This was actually due to their limited vision. Even though the dragons had lived for a long time, they had never seen humans or other races doing something like this. Their own race was also small in number. They did not even use much gold coins. Their understanding of economics was even more superficial. Chapter 1061. Prime Minister, if the paper money you mentioned is just a replacement for metal coins, I feel that it will be hard for others to accept it. Black Dragon Hurlo was obviously not interested in paper money. In my opinion, gold and silver coins are more practical. If you give me paper money, I feel that it is as worthless as a newspaper. This was actually the opinion of most people. However, the other lords were shrewd and did not express their opinions hastily. Speaking of which, the dragons thought of themselves as advanced creatures, mainly because of their extremely strong bodies. As long as they could live to adulthood, they could basically do whatever they wanted on the continent. Apart from their biological advantages, their inheritance also determined that their brains and magical attainments were superior to humans. This was not an inference, but a conclusion made after countless challenges by humans and other humanoid races. However, this perception, in recent months, was gradually being dispelled by the higher-ups of the dragons. The technology that Roddy used in the war, as well as the lessons taught by the honorary elders, clearly outlined the outline of a higher civilization. Roddy did not dare to brag about how advanced Earth civilization was in the 21st century, nor would he look down on how backward this world's magical civilization was. In fact, the knowledge that he and Kardashian brought was not limited to simple applications such as thermal weapons technology or railway transportation. The most important point was the promotion of scientific methodology. This was a logical system that could be applied to all things. Its existence was equally important to the exploration of magic. Because the dragons were intelligent, they vaguely felt a sense of reverence. Victor had a very deep understanding of his daughter's changes. At this time, he did not casually ignore Roddy's opinion like before. He said aloud, "Prime Minister, can you explain a thing or two to us? Currency is a very complicated theory. I can only briefly state the most practical point here. In the past, the metal coinage system had a very high rate of wear and tear. Long-distance transportation. Roddy spoke frankly and with assurance in front of the feudal lords. Not long after, he was surrounded by about 10 elders. This scene was quickly captured by the reporters. If it is changed to paper money because it is easy to carry, on average, if the weight of goods carried by each person is reduced by 10%, then with an excellent network system, including the consumption in the process of use and dissemination. The dragons were too small, so they had not yet calculated the loss of currency in a country with millions of people. The suzerains began to ponder, but Iskar, who was standing in another corner, whispered to Kardashian, "Why do I feel that the Prime Minister is just talking about the most superficial things?" If it's just to reduce wastage, why do we need to spend so much effort on paper money? Several honorary elders also attended in splendid attire. The accessories on their bodies were of the same level as the dragon's elders. As the owner of the magic tower, Edith was also chatting with Kardashian. Both she and Kardashian were wearing badges that represented the senior management of the Magic Research Department. The badges were even more powerful than the badges of the Minister of the Interior. Even the dragons would be polite when they saw the badges. Kardashian's posture was relaxed. She held a glass of wine in her hand and smiled. Roddy has a lot of ideas. Of course he likes to hide the most important things. Black Dragon Hurlo Rubens was not as impatient as before, but he still could not hold back. He covered his mouth with his hand and mouthed, "Then, tell us about it?" Kardashian knew that the few people in front of her were Roddy's most trusted subordinates, so she glanced at the calm Edith and coughed softly. "Then I'll explain it simply. As the government that issues the currency, you set an official exchange rate. For example, 1 gold coin is equal to $100. Then, ordinary people have to exchange paper money according to this exchange rate. But as the government? As long as the country's economic development can keep up, and at the same time, the domestic situation is stable, the amount of money issued can be increased infinitely." Eshin was the first to react. "Isn't that equivalent to overdrawing the country's credit as collateral? Well, if more paper money is issued, won't the price of goods rise?" Kardashian did not speak, but the few of them were smart. Iskar nodded. "In that case, the Prime Minister intends to use this method to temporarily repudiate the debt, and then evenly distribute the risk of the debt crisis to the people of the country. As long as you use paper money, it is equivalent to bearing part of the debt for the cabinet." After saying this, the few of them looked at each other, feeling incredulous. The debt crisis was the first big problem to be solved after the end of the war. They all knew that if the debt could not be paid, then the country would definitely have a big problem. Without money, they could not control the army and nobles. Under the frequent turmoil, Sally I's prestige would definitely decline rapidly. It might even become a situation where warlords were divided again. They originally thought that Roddy would quickly repay the debt by vigorously developing technology and quickly reselling arms. In the end, this problem seemed to be easily solved with the invention of paper money. Just as the few honorary elders were trying hard to digest this shocking news, Pucasto's heroic voice came from Roddy's side. "Afraid of the circulation problem? That's easy. When the time comes, we can print the emblem of our Black Dragon Hurlo clan on it. Isn't this credit guarantee enough?" When he mentioned this, the other lords also did not want to be left behind. "This is a good idea. In fact, according to the Prime Minister, we can also use this kind of currency within the dragons. Even if the usage of gold coins is not large, it is really convenient for transfer and storage. Those juniors often go back and forth a few times just to transport those copper and silver coins. It's really silly." Therefore, the 5 lords decided on the spot. Not only would they develop anti-counterfeiting and durable paper money, but they would also print the dragon's language and the emblem of the 5 great dragons on the paper money. They would also use it themselves to prove the stability of this alliance. Roddy agreed very calmly, still smiling. But when Iskar and the others heard this, they all looked at Kardashian and Edith. The latter did not say anything before, but now she sighed. "I really admire the Prime Minister. He used the country's credit as collateral. In fact, it is enough to get through this debt crisis. But with the addition of the 5 great dragons," she did not say what the consequences would be, but the few honorary elders all understood one thing: their research funds would definitely not be lacking in the future. This kind of currency had not been released yet, but it had already determined the status of the entire continent's hegemonic currency in the future. Compared to the Earth's US dollar, Roddy's sudden appearance of financial plunder was far more powerful than the forbidden spell to the other countries and civilizations on this continent. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.